Today's guest is a former U.S. Marine who sold his company for $70 million.
It forced me to do the same thing for 8 years. I couldn't leave.
After serving 8 years in the military, he's built an insurance empire, generating tens of millions of dollars a year and serving over 50,000 clients worldwide. How much money would you say you've made off that Facebook group?
I would say 50 million. But when you have an extremely niche audience that are all looking to you for the exact right reason, it gives you a lot of influence and a lot of power.
In this episode, we'll dive into his journey from young Marine to veteran entrepreneur, his philosophies on marketing, discipline, and leadership, as well as the dark secrets behind America's healthcare system. The CEO of United Healthcare was assassinated. Who do you think is responsible? Justin Brock. Welcome to the Jack Neel Podcast.
Absolutely, man. Thank you so much for having me.
Good place to start here, man. Former U.S. Marine, how much did you sell your company for?
Yeah, our company, the valuation was around 70 million at time of exit. We sold 51% of it. So I have to backwards engineer into that math. That's one of those little...
The valuation was how much?
70 million.
70 million.
Yes.
Okay.
And I sold 51% at that.
So like 35 and a little change.
Right, yeah. So we had like the biggest thing that I think is captivating about our world is the EBITDA multiples. You know, when people get into like what businesses are the most valuable. In ours, because there's so much renewal-based income, it pulls a higher EBITDA. So ours was in a 10x with a 1x earnout on the front end of that 51%.
Can you break down EBITDA for like younger viewers who don't understand that concept?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're, and this is something that it's one of those things in the education system. It's like, why don't people understand this? Because, and I didn't either. Getting out of the Marine Corps and going into insurance, all I knew was sell insurance. But eventually you started getting around this information. And it was like, why is this not taught earlier? Because EBITDA is basically an acronym that means earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. What that simply is it's closely relative to your net revenue. Net revenue is when you have a business and let's say you make $1 million. Somebody might tell you, I make $1 million. Well, they might have lost 100,000. So grossing $1 million and spending 1.1 million, you didn't make any money. You actually lost money. So you have to look at what is the net revenue. What does I actually get to bring home? So if I made $1 million and I netted 500,000, I technically made 500,000. So when you sell a business, they're looking at the apparatus that you've built that can continue to produce income past the point of you not even being involved, right? So if you're in a business that has very low renewal-based income or accounts that keep buying. And there's different types of renewal-based income. For instance, like Coca-Cola, people are going to keep buying Coca-Cola products. So it's renewal-based based on their users are almost addicted to that brand, right? But then there's other ones where someone becomes a customer and it's subscription-based, like cellular companies and cable and Netflix, yeah. Right? And with insurance, it's similar. So when somebody takes out an insurance policy, most of them are going to keep it for a long period of time, if not for life, depending on what the policy is. And some types of insurance have a renewal-based commission where if I place the product correctly and that person keeps that policy for 10 years, I'm going to get a small commission relative to every month when they pay their premium or stay enrolled in that plan. And because of that renewal-based income, you can get a higher multiple, or what a multiple is how many years worth of your profit will a company pay you to buy your company.
Got it.
So if you made 10 million in profit and you're in you have an organization where someone will pay you 10 years worth of profit, then you could get $100 million exit at one time when you're only really making 10 million a year. The other side of that is the taxation on it goes to capital gains versus active income taxation, which is about half. And so technically, if I'm making 10 million a year and I sell it for 100 million, then I get $100 million up front, but I also pay half the taxes. So it's almost like 20 years worth of that income or 15 or whatever that accounts to, right? But so there's a lot of benefit in doing that.
It's really interesting. Okay, so what was the multiple for your business? About 14x?
It's 10x with a 1x earnout. And in our industry, the highest is 18, but those are what the platform organizations that are buying companies like mine are trading themselves on the open capital market. And that market's like when you go to, everybody's heard of BlackRock or Blackstone. When you go to those types of capital firms and you say, hey, we want to go buy more of this distribution, we can buy it at 10x. What will you value? And they're saying, well, we'll value you at 18x because they're going to go and trade it at 20x. So it's like they're all arbitraging the multiples. I even did it. Like I bought some people at 2 to 3x and then put them into my EBITDA and then traded myself at 10x.
Oh, so
So
you did a roll up of other
I
insurance.
mine was predominantly what we built ourselves, but
Mhm.
then we did have part of our EBITDA was based on a roll up of a smaller entity.
Got it. So explain to me your company. Just give me a rundown.
Yeah, so the primary focus of our company when I started was go out, find people that are either aging into Medicare, meaning they're turning 65, they're getting off of a group health insurance plan, and now they have to go on the government's version of healthcare, which is Medicare, for retirement. Medicaid is for people in low income, right? So we were going out and finding those people that are having to make that transition, and then we would help them educate them on the difference between the group plan they're used to, or maybe the Obamacare plan they're used to, and the Medicare market. And then when we would educate them on that, they would typically use us as a broker with multiple insurance companies to help find the product that's best for them. And then we service their policy and them for the duration of their life after that, hopefully. That's how I started as an individual. That's what the typical like tip of the spear in our business is. But our company became bigger where we would recruit other agents in and we would train them on how to get in front of more Medicare beneficiaries because as time goes on with marketing and just the psychology of marketing is it gets more and more difficult to get in front of people because the trust factor is increasingly difficult. Not only are there actual scam artists and cold callers and all that, but even the good people that are trying to get through, if they're trying the same tactics that a telemarketer is, they're going to just appear like a telemarketer. So we had to train them on education-based marketing and entertainment-based marketing for that senior demographic. And so we built an online community of agents, and we have kind of a direct to agent channel where we would recruit insurance agents and train them. And then we have a call center of direct to consumer agents where we market ourselves to Medicare beneficiaries. And then we use the ideas on how we market to the consumer to train our agent partners on how to market as well. So it's kind of two revenue streams, one on kind of almost like a marketing agency for insurance agents, and the other is actually selling the products that we were training the others to do.
Is it like 50-50 of the business or like what's the priority?
The majority of the revenue up until about 2 years ago was the direct to consumer side, but the fastest growing portion of the revenue was the marketing side.
Got it. So if you sell a policy to someone, how long do they maintain that policy for? Or who's the like avatar? Is it a 65-year-old?
That's the perfect person, but we can do like you can advertise to 65 plus, and you can find someone who's maybe 68, 69, 70, 75 that is on the wrong policy, or maybe they're on a plan and the hospital system near them is saying we're not going to take Humana anymore, or we're not going to take Aetna anymore, and that's we call that a strategic event where you'll like go in and market in that area to people that are likely to be on one of those plans that isn't accepted anymore, and we help them change to a plan that is accepted by that hospital system. So that's one way. But the T65 side, if you can help someone when they first go on Medicare, and then you train them that hey, when something changes, you call our office, then you can typically keep that customer for life. So if you imagine you get somebody at 65, you're talking about a 15 to 20 year lifespan on a customer typically. I mean,
So is
you're
that
looking
why
at
the business has such high multiples? Because you're essentially buying all the existing clients and expecting that they'll have a 15-year like staying on the plan, so they automatically would pay for 15 years in advance.
I'd say they're paying higher multiples for three reasons. One is what you just explained is you already have the customer accounts that are likely to stay on the books. So there's some continuity income just built into the operation. The second aspect of it is how quickly is our business growing? So what is our market share increase? And so we're at 34 to 36% year over year net increase. That means every year we're increasing. So they're buying that, but they're also buying in a marketplace that continues to increase. So when you look at a business, it's like there's a star, there's a cash cow, there's a dog, and there's a question mark. And if you look at it, it's like a quadrant. And that quadrant has on the star is the biggest company in a growing market. So like earlier we talked about like Coca-Cola. I can't imagine that's a shrinking market,
Yeah.
and they are the biggest, right? So that there would be what I would consider a star company. But then there's cash cows where you're in a growing market, but you're not the biggest company. So that means there's plenty of room to grow, and it is a growing market, right? And then there's dogs, which means you're a you're a small company in a market that's not growing, and then question marks is a big company in a market that's not growing. But they use that quadrant to decide like what's the value of a company. So when you start looking at private equity groups and what multiples they'll pay, they're paying based on that quadrant. Like, who are we looking at? And so we would be considered a cash cow type of business because we're in a growing marketplace and we're a growing business, but we're not the biggest. So we have market share to make up. Whereas like Coca-Cola's got to stay on top. They are the biggest. Like Prime is coming in and taking market share from Coca-Cola, right? So they have to continue to fight to be dominant in that spot.
With your industry, is it like the star company? Do they take the majority of the market share, or is there like is it pretty
Right
split?
now, we were in an industry where there were certainly bigger, older groups that were the biggest ones were mostly large because of just the timing. Like they had been in the marketplace for so long. But when these private equity companies entered our industry, and this happens in a lot of industries, there's a tremendous amount of consolidation. But right now, you basically have two large platform companies or private equity infused groups that are buying all the distribution. In our industry, they're called Integrity and AmeriLife. That's the two. AmeriLife bought 51% of our organization, and Integrity's bought tons of organizations as well. And so it gets to the point now where it's hard to discern what businesses are, those cash cows and those stars because people look at Integrity and AmeriLife as the two companies, but they're not really organizations that operate and compete with us. They're like platforms, so they have a lot of companies in their portfolio. So it can muddy it up in the consolidation period. There's also like different strategies in private equity. So like the Integrity Marketing Group, when they would buy people, they'd buy 100% of their equity or their equity. So they'd buy out the people outright, and they would have an earn out period, but they didn't have as much skin in the game after the deal because they technically didn't own the company anymore. AmeriLife's strategy was to buy 51 to 70%, but make you keep retained equity. So you technically got less up front, but with a lot more potential built directly into your company. So anyway, it's
What's the benefit of you selling? Because you get this 35 million, and there's obviously some tax benefits because you get capital gains as opposed to income tax, and then you also get the arbitrage of having that money now and being able to invest it in the market. What are the other benefits? Because you're still the CEO of the company. You're not able
yeah.
to work on other projects necessarily that you could have before.
It's like I can work on other things that don't compete with that company. So they'll have a pretty defined non-compete based on the actual services of that company. That non-compete typically lasts about a year post termination. So if you quit or they let you go, you'd have about 12 months where you couldn't compete at all in those exact same spheres. But to your question, the benefit is really peace of mind because we were in a market that was in a very close to like government programs, and so for me it was more of like we never know what's going to happen from politician to politician. We had you have some programs that flourish under Democrats, you have some that flourish under Republicans. But under like several years of the Biden administration, there was a lot of regulation, and it got to the point where it's like, okay, if Biden's reelected for another 4 years and we continue to get regulation on top of regulation on top of regulation, how viable is our marketplace and can we continue to grow? And while I was in some ways optimistic, once someone starts waving a big check in your face that lets you know, hey, I can take this, and then no matter what happens, I'll make sure my family's set. That's a difficult. It's a conundrum, and I've talked to a lot of people that have sold and a lot of people that have turned it down, and we all kind of feel very similar that it's a personal decision, but you at some point you have to decide how much pride do I have, and how much am I willing to risk on this? Is this the project that I risk it all on, or is this the one where I say, hey, I hit a home run, my first at bat, like let's take some money off the table and we can always double down on the retained equity or additional projects in the future.
So your EBITDA multiple is based off. You said it was 10x,
Mhm.
and then you said it was one something else. What was it?
1x earnout. So
What does that mean?
basically, most of these organizations will tie you up in an earnout provision that says if you hit certain growth goals over the next 3 years, you get a portion of your earnout. So if you had, let's say you had $10 million in net revenue or EBITDA, that's 1x, 10 million they put aside, and they say, okay, over the next 3 years, if you hit this earnout, you get this in thirds. So your first fiscal year, your first year after sale, we're going to give you 1/3 of that money. So in our case, it's like a $1.7 million annual earnout bonus that if we hit, I think with us, it's 15% basically net growth each year, then we get that bonus. So
Do you
we're,
regret selling now that Trump is getting elected?
it's a good question. No, because there's definitely some peace of mind that I've never experienced in my life that I have, that I think it's, completely okay. I believe that the 49% retained equity is going to be a great investment for me. I think I'll make 2 to 3x what I did on the first 51 on the retained 49, and I definitely think part of that is a Trump, office is going to help because it will be a lot less regulatory on our market.
Yeah, something I wanted to ask you about was you lost 26 pounds selling your business.
Yeah.
Explain to me like why that was.
Yeah, I don't, not, I actually, I can tell you, it started not really, it started before I officially went into what you call the due diligence period with the sale. I was at this Etna event in Florida, and my wife took a picture of me in my underwear, and I saw it, and I was like, gross. So I think I automatically got like in my head thinking I have to get in shape, because what's the point of like making good money if you're like also like melting, So it started there, but in the process of selling, actually right after the sale is when I lost the biggest chunk. And I think it was because I had that peace of mind. I had that freedom that hit in my head. And I just said, what's next? And I actually saw this video, and Love Him or Hate Him is a Wes Watson video. He's my brother, can't stand the guy, but he had this video where he said, I see these rich guys in their Rolls Royces. They got no bicep vein, no tattoo or no tan. This is what he's saying in there. And they're fat. And I was sitting there thinking, not that I'm riding around in a Rolls Royce, but I felt like I have done pretty well in business. And I started thinking, he's not wrong. Like, he's completely right. Is like, you hit this level of financial success and you're like, but I want to have like a full kind of package of feeling like I am in good shape and I'm proud of myself, my health. I'm proud of the health and the wealth side. I feel like I've done really well with my family. I have a great tight family. My daughter's here with me today. Um, and I felt like we've done really well in business and we'll continue to do so, but really needed to round it out and lose some weight. And I'm still on that journey right now, because I'm not at all where I want to be. I think when you get in that mode, you just keep moving that needle. But for years, I was neglecting the health because I wasn't a guy that like gains a lot of weight, but I was getting out of shape. But in my head, I kept telling myself, I'm okay with being in moderate shape as long as, I'm making money and my family's happy and all that. And then I think that's just a lie you tell yourself to kind of put it off. And then eventually when I hit that breaking point, it's like I have no excuse anymore to not focus on my health.
So when you sold the company, like $36 million, where does that go? Like, does it just go straight to your bank account or?
Yeah, at first so we create a holdings account and you get a wire. And yeah, when you first get those wires, there's this period of like, what now? Because it's not like anything technically changes,
So it just goes in your account, like your personal bank account. You just see that amount
Yeah,
of money.
just pops in. So I actually was on the phone with the platform company, and they do like a congratulatory call when everything like officially goes through, and um, and they're saying congratulations, we just sent the wire, and then after that you're just like refreshing your bank account to wait for the wire, because it still kind of feels like, did I just get bamboozled? Like, did they just
Yeah.
take my company and not give me anything? And then boom, you refresh it one time and it's in. So mine was in 2 wires. I had 2 holdings accounts, so it was actually 2 accounts. So it's like 18 million in one and 14 million in another. And the first one came into 14 million, and I saw it hit, and I was like, okay, well, it's at least half real at this point. But then it takes a little bit to sink in, and then you think, okay, what do I do with this money? Because now all my investment has been in a company, and that's an active income pursuit that, like, when you reinvest back in your company, you kind of feel like you know where it's going. But then when you turn into a true passive income investor, which is a funny concept, by the way, like people so often talk about 7 streams of income and passive income and all that. And most young guys that are trying to make money should really be focused on active income and creating a business and then scaling through multiple layers of active income before they ever get to a passive income stream. That's what I did. I didn't have a bunch of passive income. It was
Totally agree. Yeah.
active, and then eventually you have an exit event or you just make so much money that you can start siphoning off money for passive investments.
And even that's not passive income. You're really just trying to preserve what you
Right.
made actively.
Exactly.
That's really interesting. What was the first thing you bought when you sold your company?
Vacations. I took the family we went to Atlantis in the Bahamas and rented a yacht for a day, and then rented like a 130-foot yacht. It was awesome. And then we went to Disney and Universal for VIP tours, and then actually right after that we did another vacation to Italy, and we did we chartered a 66-foot Pershing and took like a 3-day cruise from Naples down to Positano and Capri, just doing stuff that before, like, not that you couldn't afford it, but in my head, like up until that event, it was like I was probably always a little frugal for how much money I technically was making. So it wouldn't seem like that to other people. Like some people that would know me would be like, "Oh, he's spending money," but I was always spending a little bit like less than I was making at the time. Like,
What percent of your money did you spend? You think?
like on lifestyle?
Yeah, on personal.
Before I would say 60% on my life. Like in the couple of years before, I was taking about 40%. Now that's after I reinvested in the business. That's like true after you have like net distributions. I was still putting about 40% away.
So I guess total then, like if you had to account for investing in the business, would you say it was like 10%?
Oh my gosh, I was probably living off 10%. It would have been like, if you really look at it, let's see, the year before I sold, I made 13.2 million, and I probably spent $1 million on my personal life that year.
How important is being frugal, like in hindsight?
I think it's extremely important. So like there's the concept of delay. So there's a lot of this that happens in the young buck business world. They get into a sales career and they make 100,000, they make 150, they make 200,000, and it's more money than they've ever made in their life. And they'll go and buy a watch, or they'll go and buy a nice car, whatever it is. And there's the delayed gratification concept just cannot be overstated. Like, quit worrying about these are not going to be that fulfilling. The watches will not be very fulfilling. The cars will not be very fulfilling. If there's, and I say that as somebody has an $85,000 truck. My wife drives a nice Escalade. I've had a Lamborghini Huracan. I sold it. It wasn't as fulfilling as you would think. It was kind of fun for a minute. I'm just, the only thing that I've bought that is gratifying to me is the experiences with the family, like the vacations. I just really don't regret those at all. Like just here yesterday, we go and do Universal VIP days with me and my daughter while we're in town in Hollywood for a day. Not that that's crazy expensive, but like those types of experiences, I don't regret ever. But anytime I buy, and I don't regret all luxury items, if you get into a point where it's such a small amount of your money that it's irrelevant, then I don't think it's that big of a deal. But when people are like making 150,000 and they have a $20,000 watch, that's pretty ridiculous. Like, you shouldn't have that unless you're in some sort of field where that actually is going to help you in some way and
Does
you
it
can
help you?
justify it.
You work directly in sales. I feel like that'd be the one place.
I would say that owning Rolexes in some way maybe helped a little bit. I'm not sure that the amount that you paid for them ever actually, like, I got that much help until you were at a level. I don't know. I couldn't directly say it helped. It certainly has made me meet some people. But when you think about owning I've got a couple that are like $50,000 Rolexes, and they help me meet a couple of people, but it's not in my business. It hasn't really helped. I think, obviously if you're a watch, trader or something, that might make sense. And it
helps if you know how to use it properly.
In my business, the but on both sides of our business, there were never people that were that I was looking to build a relationship with that cared that much about that. There's a couple on the agent side that were impressed by it, and there's certainly different types of recruiting organizations that it probably helps, like because they'll be drawn to the guy with the flash. I was never recruiting those people. We were recruiting people that were probably a little bit past that. Like,
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Usually the people that are interested in it are not going to make you any more money. You
Right.
know? It has to be like something very like specific. Like I had Tristan Tate on the podcast and he talked about how Laura Piana was like a type of fabric that people who are really nerdy about like designer clothes know about. Like I'm sure I could see something like that helping, but it's like wildly expensive. Anything that you know about already, like a Rolex or
Yeah.
like a Patek, a Richard Mille, I feel like those things really don't help you connect with upper level entrepreneurs, but they help you like kind of, I don't know, garner an audience of people wanting to be wealthy.
Yeah, that's one thing that happens. So like most of the people, so what I've noticed is, so like right now I'm wearing a PVD Yachtmaster 2. It's like I think I paid like 15,000 for it aftermarket. I have two $50,000 Rolexes. The people that I've gotten attention for on those, they're flashier looking. They like have the gold date just or date, whatever it is. Anyway, I'm not good with the names of them. I have like 6. I'm still not that great with them. But on those, the people that have been drawn to like the all gold diamond type of watches are the people that couldn't, I'd say never, that's condescending, but that can't afford them currently. The people that are drawn to the PVD Yacht 2 are people that have Rolex. And I think it's because it's rare. So kind of like you're talking about with the fabric concept, it's something that's like, oh, that's neat. That's something that you don't see every day. And so that might help you bridge a relationship gap with someone. Whereas I'd hate to say that they're completely valueless, but they're certainly not as you really need, like, I'll tell you how much I was making. Let's say the first Rolex I bought was 10,500 and it was a Submariner, stainless Submariner blackface. That's the only one I ever wanted. I just liked that watch. I thought it was a sharp watch. You could wear it with anything. And I was like, I'm going to get that one day. I made $1 million in that year that I bought that personally, like not my business, but like personally took $1 million and then I bought a $10,000 watch. So I think relative to like what I was making, that's a pretty modest purchase. So, that I think that's what people need to think about is like, if I'm going to go buy, like it's not, even if that didn't help me, it was not really a relevant in my budget item.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, I will say this. I have bought watches like that for key employees and team members, and that I feel like I got a lot of value out of that, giving it to someone else.
I agree with that for sure. I think those things are good gifts. I usually spend on gifts or experiences that are for other people because it helps build relations. But like me personally, I'm not someone that values it. I know most like business entrepreneurs, like the actual CEOs. I haven't met many that actually value those things.
Yeah.
Like they value hiring. Like when they get 100K, they're like, I want to hire this person now, or I want to buy this asset for my business. I don't know.
Oh, it's totally like that. I mean, the fastest. So there's plenty of agents and agency owners that I've like shepherded, I guess, like from young guys, and there's some that I bring up all the time. And the ones that grow the fastest are the most frugal. I mean, there's one guy's a great friend of mine now, and he's in his late 20s, and he started in his early 20s, and I, helped him along the way. I'd take no credit for what he's done. I've just like maybe given him some ideas, but he would always run with them. He's probably, I think he's making 7 or 8 million a year right now in his business. Grew it from scratch, and really grew most of that in the last like 3 years. And he was living, I think he was paying himself $600 a week up until like he just went up to like 10,000 a month. So like just went up to like 120,000 at a $7 million a year, and with a high net potential, but he just keeps rolling all the profits back into the business. And it's not like nothing he's doing is, people always look at it like, oh, he just knows something we don't. And it's like bits and pieces, yeah, but most of his success is that he just doubles down hard on the business. He puts all the money and the effort back into the business. He's not thinking, oh, I made 500,000. Let me go spend 300,000 this year, unless it's on the business. Like that's, and so to your point, like CEOs and, business people. And I'll say that like I tried to find the gratification in some of those things. So I was, so I don't think there's any shame in it. Some people are on a journey where they're like, where does gratification come from? And for me, the biggest gratification has been family experiences and then watching other people win and feeling like you helped with that process.
Tell me about the Disney thing. I have been fortunate enough to be on one of these before, but uh, how much does a Disney private tour cost?
I don't even know the cost of it. So we used a Disney plan. So Disney World Orlando private VIP tour. I'm pretty sure it's significant. I'm probably going to butcher
It's
the
like
cost on this.
6,000,
I
isn't
think
it?
it is something like that for the day.
So how much is it?
I want to say it's like I want to say it was 10,000, but I'm not.
Oh,
But
gotcha.
I'm not positive. Um, but I will say this: it's awesome because you drive around. Like they were driving us up to the back entrances of parks to get you closer to the rides. Going in, you're doing like it's unlimited fast pass with the tour guide, which tends to get you a little bit of moving a chain to go around stuff
So
type
you
of
go
thing.
straight to the front of the line.
Yeah, and it is. Yeah, we've done now VIP Disney 3 times. So what happened was right after COVID, that when Disney first opened up after COVID,
Mhm.
my wife says, "I want to take the kids to Disney." So they're open, but they're still doing masks, and we went just like regular, like the regular way, And I told her I was like, I will never do this again. It's terrible. It was hot. It was humid. We're wearing masks. The people at Disney were like hopping over stuff to yell at kids about their mask coming down their nose. It was bad. You remember like right after COVID how even like flight attendants, it felt like their job was mostly mask police and second service. And then eventually that started to reverse, back to normalcy. Well, this was in that period where the Disney employees, it was like they were so like it was like their first priority was not because normally Disney is like an amazing company at like user experience. Like you go and it is magical. Like they're awesome. Like I'm not talking bad about Disney, but just for a blip there when they opened back up after COVID, their employees' first priority was mask police, and it was uncomfortable. Not to mention the lines were super long because they were very spaced out. So I probably went at the worst possible time to experience Disney, and I told my wife, "We'll never do that again." And then when she wanted to do it, I said, "I'll do a private VIP tour. I don't care what it costs. That's the only way I'm going." And so she booked that, and I like it. Now I've done it 3 times. So, but I will only do it that way.
What
I'm
other
not.
benefits were there in it? Do you remember?
It's
Like, does
mostly
it get you a hotel or is that separate?
we bought the hotel separate and everything. So, I mean, I have to like I think our trip like for a family of 4 to Disney VIP, Universal VIP day, and then the stays is like 25 or 30 grand probably for the
Mm.
way we do it. So, which is, but like we had a trip right after we sold that I spent 100 grand in that week, you know, which is, now I wouldn't do that every week because, you still have to get to a point where you're like, it's crazy because somebody could look at like $35 million and think, oh, you can do whatever you want. You can spend it pretty damn fast. I mean, stuff is really expensive. And when you get into luxury item world and you get into like high end concierge vacations, stuff adds up
Hmm.
quick.
What was the best use of your money? Like, for yourself?
That Italy trip was amazing. My family just talks about it all the time. Like that's all they want to do is go back. We rented that the 66-foot Pershing yacht with a 2-man crew. It was a man and woman. We made great friends with them. Kiko Christmas was the captain's name, and Gabrielle was the first mate. And like I'm still friends with them on social media. That few days with them was like it was just awesome. Like South Italy, in Positano and Capri. We lived in Japan for 3 years. I've been to I don't know how many countries. I've
You
been
lived in
all
Japan for 3 years?
yeah. When I was in the Marine Corps, my daughter was born in Tokyo.
Oh
So
my
I've
gosh.
been to a
Yeah.
lot of different places, and that like from the boat South Italy, Positano and Capri, and that area. It's nothing I've done has amounted to that much fun.
Hmm. What do you think of Japan?
I love Japan. The culture is superior. The people are like amazing. Give you a story. So we first get to Japan. My son is 3 months old. We get there and we're acclimating. We go to a restaurant, probably, I would say, within the first couple of weeks. Go to this restaurant, and my wife's like germophobic at the point because she just had her first kid. She leaves a big bottle of Germ-X at this restaurant. We go back 3 months later, and as soon as we walk in, this lady who'd only seen us one time, Japanese lady, sees my wife and goes, "Oh," and she runs back in the back and brings out this bottle of Germ-X and returns it to us. And I'm like, never in America would this happen. Like, I mean, it's almost like lunacy that they cared that much, but that is just the testament of like how much, like how genuine and like kind those people are. They're just, that culture is great, and we enjoyed it exponentially. My wife wants to go back big time, so we.
What do you
probably
think the
will.
main differences are between like Japanese and American cultures? Like, or like, what do you think the cause is of Japan looking so efficient and everyone being so nice to each other, kind, respectful?
Man, so when I was there, I had a lady that worked for me that was Japanese, and it's not an extremely religious society, but culturally, a lot of their stuff does stem from Buddhism. So, for instance, like she would have considered herself an atheist, but she practiced cultural things relative to Buddhism. We would talk about it, like when her pen would be out of ink, she would like almost like this Japanese seance or prayer or whatever she was saying to the pen, where she would thank it for its service before she threw it in the trash. And I think it's just like maybe incrementally caring so much about the usefulness of every individual thing, like their value of like, you know, other people's time and other people, like how much they value everything is just so different. So maybe it's like a building block of when you care about every little thing so much, it's hard to not care about the big picture and other people, and but so that would be the best way I could explain it.
It's
But
really interesting. They're not very big picture focused.
yeah,
Because that's the way the religion works. It's a very ground up religion. I think they also teach their math in a very different way. That
oh, they do.
they have like very different fundamentals. Do you know how they do?
They use I'm going to use the wrong word, but they use one of those
Hibiscus? No, it's
hibiscus. Yes,
is it, that's what it's
I
called.
think
An
it's
abacus.
abacus.
Yeah.
Yes, so they use it, and they do heavy counting exercises. Another thing they do is they don't start math until like 7 or 8 years old. So when we were there, my son went to Japanese kindergarten, or Japanese daycare, which is Yochin, and all the way it was explained to us, and we didn't live there until they got to this age, but the way it was explained is everything is very customs and courtesies driven until they're like 8. So like what would be like second or third grade here, they don't even really do like reading and all that. I'm not saying that maybe at home some of them aren't learning it, but they don't prioritize it that early.
They prioritize
They
customs.
prioritize customs and courtesies, taking care of yourself, dexterity, like using like adult style utensils. And the only thing that's similar to it in America is the Montessori. So, like Montessori schools are very big on like dexterity and taking care of yourself, becoming self sufficient at a really young age. Like they're more focused on that.
Hmm.
Whereas here, outside of like Montessori and in certain parents' society, I feel like is kind of like, don't touch that, don't do that. Like we kind of treat kids like little kids for too long, and so then they don't really evolve. But then for some reason, we're shoving books in their face when they're 4 and trying to get them to read. So just a little bit backwards to the way they do it. I don't know which way's better or worse, but my experience in Japan was that everyone, children especially, were very polite, very.
You sent both kids to Japanese school, or just your son?
So my daughter was born in Tokyo right before we left. My son was born in North Carolina before we moved over there. So my daughter wasn't old enough to go, but my son did Japanese Yochin while we were there.
So your son went to Japanese kindergarten. Like, what did you notice about that? Like, was he only there for 1 year?
It wouldn't have been kindergarten. It would have been, they call it Yochin. It's like for 3-year-old, like 2, 3, and 4-year-olds.
Okay.
So it's kind of like daycare Head Start, but it was all like everybody there spoke Japanese except for a few kids that were there with the military. What we did notice at the time is that he was picking up Japanese pretty quickly. Since we did a poor job when we brought him back, we should have gotten him into some sort of Japanese lessons. It's a little bit difficult where we live to have found that, but there is a Toyota plant there, so there's actually some Japanese families. We should have done our best to kept him involved in that, because when they learn those languages at an early age, it's so much easier.
Yeah.
But I think it was good for him early on as far as, manners and just, becoming accustomed to other cultures, and we still do that. We travel a lot. We try to get our kids around other cultures so they can see, the world is a lot bigger than what, someone who stays in one little area their whole life would realize.
I want to get into some of your backstory here. So let's go all the way back a little bit. So you grew up in a town with 900 people.
Mhm.
Kind of describe to me what your upbringing was like.
Yeah, I grew up across moved there when I was about 4 years old, and I grew up across the street from a guy named Billy Joe Barnes, who is a Purple Hull pea farmer. And when I was there, even though a lot of big farm equipment existed, we were in like really low income Mississippi area. So they were still doing like hand picked peas. And so when I was 6 years old, I would go with Billy Joe and a bunch of other kids. He'd have kids from like 6 years old to like 13 picking peas in the pea field. And he'd pay us by the bushel, which is like, we'd fill up 5-gallon buckets full of, picked peas. And then my mother worked across the street where they would take the peas that we picked and they're running them through this sheller and then picking out the bad peas. And she worked on like this little assembly line where they'd pick the peas out of it. So it's funny because it seems like something that would exist in, a generation that's much older than me.
Yeah.
But it was just that little area. It's just such a poverty area that farming was even done like, probably like what you would have experienced 40 or 50 years prior.
What did your dad do?
He was a carpet salesman at Sears at that point. And then eventually he actually started selling insurance too for American General as a captive life insurance agent. So that was one of the reasons I actually got into insurance, because when I was in the Marine Corps, he had done insurance for a couple of decades, and I saw him go from, us being pretty poor to him being middle class, and I saw him do that on his own merit in insurance. So when I got out, my goal was not to sell a business or to do any of the things we'd done. That's the caveat of growing up in a town of 900 people, and the Marine Corps seemed like the big dream to me. Then you did the Marine Corps, and that just kind of opened your eyes to like this was not the level of fulfillment I was looking for. And but when I got out and I had kids and a wife, I thought, okay, my first priority is to provide for them. And I had seen my dad, go from making 25,000 a year to 6 figures in insurance. So I said, I'll try my hand in the insurance arena. So that actually is what got me into it.
So let's rewind a bit. What were you like as a kid, and then up until like high school? Were you very entrepreneurial as a kid, or were you working jobs?
No, I really wasn't. And I would love to be able to say that because, I hear the stories about people like, oh, I was like Gary Vaynerchuk, I was like, I'm flipping bubble gum and stuff. I was very social. I was a kid that was there for a good time, all the time. I was a BC student that was really just trying to make friends with everyone. And I was, played some sports, but like once I got into high school, I was very spectator driven. I would go to every basketball game to cheer on everybody. It was very friendly. Every year in high school, I got voted class favorite. Like that was my claim. I became like after 2 years old, I was like, oh, I want to get that all 4 years in a row because
Class favorite?
class favorite. That was like they did the who's who elections at the end of the school year every year. And every year I would be our class's favorite. So like freshman, sophomore, junior, senior year.
You're
I
just
was
kind of
class
friends with
favorite.
everybody.
Yeah. And that was, I became proud of that, like that, that I could make friends with everyone, that I felt like everyone got along with me. But then coming out of there, there was just no, it's just this is something we actually look for now when I'm looking for young guys. I'm like, how do you find, because every now and then you find like the guy I was talking about earlier that in his 20s is building a great business. And he was kind of more directed at those early years towards entrepreneurship, probably kind of like yourself. Like, how do you find that, and what drew them to that at such an early age? Because where I grew up, there was nothing like that. There was nothing you could really look to aspire to. And so that's actually what made the Marine Corps so appealing to me, because it was like, well, I got to get out of here and do something with my life. And And I think that's why Marine Corps recruiters do so well in like rural environments, because they're not exposed to like the tremendous potential of the world. Whereas if you were, like one of the guys I talked to about this, who's a young guy that works with us that's doing really well and is very directed straight out of the gate, like 18, 19 years old, like straight out. He grew up in Orlando and just had a lot of access early on, getting recruited in by like guys a few years older than him into opportunities. And those opportunities didn't work out, but you'd get into one opportunity that would kind of open the door to like, oh, okay, there's other things in the world. We just didn't have that where we were at, 900. And we went to a high school that it was like several 900 person communities went to one joint high school. But they're all extremely rural farm towns, not anything that where you would have someone to aspire to. We were making some YouTube content back there, but this was like pre Logan Paul, and the idea that you could actually make money with content at the time was still it was still like you would have thought at that point, like our thought process was you had to become like a famous musician or actor or something. It wasn't like you could just through your own merit or your own content develop a name brand back then.
I mean, that's honestly been fairly recent. Like when I came up on TikTok in 2020, every TikToker was like, "How do we get to YouTube, man?" And then once I got to YouTube and figured that out, I was like, "Oh, sure, I should have just stayed on TikTok." It actually turned into a pretty profitable business for some people. I just didn't do it the right way,
Yeah.
But so high school, you described yourself to me as a bit of a class clown as
yeah.
well.
Yeah, I was definitely a class clown. I was, you know, all teachers would consider me someone that was, cutting up. It wasn't like bad. Like it was, you know, I would have been considered a good kid. Like wasn't a big drinker or anything like that. Wasn't doing drugs. I stayed completely clean of that. My parents had pretty hardcore addiction issues in my childhood, and so as I grew up,
Alcohol or
a little bit of everything, but definitely alcohol, heavy alcohol. So when I was growing up and like kids would start drinking in high school, I was always pretty disinterested in it, probably because of witnessing them. So that kind of helped me clean. So I was like a class clown, but it was like more in good fun. Like I wasn't crossing the line doing crazy stuff.
what was the craziest prank you ever did?
What the craziest prank I ever did was as actually this is pretty. I don't know if this is all that crazy, but my wife and I got married at 19 and my wife was 17. So at the time we're dating in high school, I was 17 and she was 15, or I was 18 and she was 16, sometime around there. And we broke up. And so for once, I'm just now told you I didn't drink much, but I decided to go to this party and I got really intoxicated and like really hammered. And then all the kids there decided, hey, we need to go do a senior prank, but we had zero plans. And so we just took a bunch of spray paint and went up to the school and like spray painted all over the school. And I passed out in the woods and they lost me. And then I woke up and finally stumbled down the highway and somebody came and picked me up. And that was probably like the craziest thing we did to it. The other one that we're kind of known for in our area is I think we were the first school to ever hang a deer from the flagpole.
What do you mean?
In 2005, I was a junior, and then a lot of my friends were seniors, and one of them found a dead deer, and on roadkill. This was not like they went out hunting and killed the deer. It was like roadkill deer, and they decided one night that it would be hilarious to string it up to the flagpole at the high school. They tied it up by its back legs and string it up to the flagpole. And at the time, this seemed pretty innocent. Of course, we're like 16, 17, 18-year-old kids, and apparently it was a big deal because the next morning we get to school and there's like the media there, like in the local NBC affiliates and stuff are covering it. They turn it into like this disgrace. It kind of got picked up on some national syndication a little bit. And you can probably go out and find the articles about when it happened. And then it inspired like some other schools where there's kids that did this as well. But now looking back, it's something that I wouldn't want my kids to do because, of course, it's definitely like, I think people were kind of paraphrasing it as desecrating the flag and stuff. The flag actually wasn't up there. They just had the deer up there when they got there. But it kind of turned into like, this is anti-patriot. And the kids these days, it's kind of, that's a funny thing is like, I always tell people, I'll talk to older agency owners and they're trying to hire, and they'll say, well, kids these days don't want to work. I have to remind them, people have been using that phrase kids these days for 100 years.
Yeah.
Like, that's just the way you talk. So like the media at the time, we you know, took the deer up the flagpole and they're like, kids these days. And since then I've had to tell people, I was like, at one point, the people that were saying kids these days to us were probably at Woodstock doing acid and having orgies in the 60s. So like, give me a break, like kids are going to do dumb shit. But at the end of the day, it was kind of funny.
You said you started a trend with it too, right?
Yeah, if you go and look it up now, there's like multiple high schools around the country that have done it. So I feel like, I don't know if it inspired these other ones to do it or if it just happened that way, but we were certainly the first ones that had done that.
Like, do you think Gen Z works harder than millennials?
I don't think that there's a huge correlation between the willingness to work and a generation. It's more about what motivates them to work. I think that all generations will work just as hard as the last. It's just that what they find appealing and what draws them into the work is changing. So I think maybe millennials, and the millennials I would almost categorize into two different groups, because like the younger millennials, I think, got to the point where they were more drawn to causes. They wanted to feel like they were part of something. Gen Z, the younger Gen Zs, I think, are kind of backlashing against the narrative that they feel like millennials created for them. So there's some of that like inter-era, politics of like the way they communicate. But when we hire, I've hired people from Gen Z, I've hired people from millennials, I've hired Gen Xers. I have the hardest time getting along with people older than me. I actually do really well with people younger than me. Hiring older people, I feel more of a like know-it-all type of presence that I get from Gen X and especially the baby boomer generation. And I say that with all due respect to them because, I think that they're also navigating the world from the way that they've seen it. And it's also maybe a shift in the way their mind changes as they age and they see other generations. But I feel like people also need to remind baby boomers that the greatest generation, the World War II generation that kind of spit them out back in the day, talked about them the same way. So the same way they're talking about millennials and Gen Z is the way that the greatest generation talked about the boomers.
No, it's very true. Yeah, I've had interesting experiences with hiring. I think some of my hardest workers have been older, but some of my most valuable employees have been younger. But
That's a great point. So one of my, he would watch this and agree. My biggest grunt laborer guys, a good friend of mine too, Jeff. He's a Gen X guy, and he's one of my older employees, works his ass off, but his understanding of things, like I'll have a guy that might be 15 years younger than him, who I'm not saying he would ever be as grunt labor focused as Jeff as that generation, but the way he can understand the world that we're in. I think maybe it's just the evolution of technology and like the utilization of social streams and there's this concept. I mean, with things are evolving so fast and this will sound kind of silly, but like you had, emails, then text, then iMessage, then social media streams, then DMs, then Slack channels or Google Chats, things like that. Then like grouped communication by Facebook groups and by different types of Slack channels. And then you have ChatGPT infusing its way into this, and you have the evolution of CRMs and content client relationship managers. Like the way that, like when you take somebody from an older generation, even that's tech savvy, still difficult for them to keep up with so many changes. And now I do think that younger people need to understand that they will probably end up there too. Like that's going to keep evolving. One day they're going to be 40. So you need to make your money.
Has that happened to you? Like as a successful, I would call you medium young person,
I would say my goal has always been to stay very astute of like what's going on, but only I need to understand it from a high level. I don't need to be like granularly involved in it. So Discord is one that I will say that I completely don't understand. My son is a big gamer, and he's on Discord channels, and like when I try to navigate his
That happened to me
Discord,
too. I was 23, or I'm 23 now, but I remember being 21, and like it's like slightly younger generation than me uses Discord, and what it took was I was like, oh my gosh, every single person I want to hire is on Discord.
yeah,
Like they will not join a Slack channel. They won't keep up with
right.
it. So I had to learn it, but it took a while for me to figure it out. But it's pretty easy once you.
That's what I feel like. You just have to. But I do think what I have experienced with some of the older, like once you get right now, like let's call it over 45, even the tech savvy over 45 crowd, like for their generation, would have been considered the techie guys. Some of them they struggle to like keep up to date with how fast it changes, I feel like.
Definitely.
And I don't blame them, because you just get to a point where it's like, why would I want to have to evolve? And so my feedback for younger generations is like, take advantage of the period of time where you are on top of like the understanding of tech, because by the time it does start to elude you and you don't want to adapt anymore, you want to be in a position where it's okay that you don't. Because if you're in a position where you're still required to adapt and you're starting to struggle, you're going to become less and less valuable to the workplace. But if you own the entire apparatus, it doesn't really matter as much.
Yeah, you should be in a point where you
Yeah.
can hire that person
hmm
who understands it. That's really
So
interesting.
what I would try to do is understand the utilization of it. Like, as our team started using AI a lot more, I would try to keep up just in enough to where when they would explain something that they created or a process, that I could, at least be like, oh, I understand how you came to that conclusion or how you, made that. Like, I don't have to understand every single finite detail. And this is by no means me drawing correlation with Steve Jobs, but like, I don't think Steve Jobs understood every process at Apple, but
I don't think he understood most of them.
I don't think he did, but he understood enough of possibilities in marketing and like the user experience that he was able to kind of keep his hands around it. But he didn't have to understand, like, I mean, that's why there were Steve Wozniaks and, all the Steve Wozniak type people. They had to get into the granular level. But isn't it funny though, like how many stories there are of them saying it was impossible and him, who didn't understand it as much, saying it wasn't impossible and he was right and they were wrong?
And why do you think that is? Just because he didn't understand
I
it?
just think
He didn't know how hard it was?
Sometimes I think like having a madman that's like pushing everyone is necessary for all these other people to like push past their own limits.
That makes sense. It's like having a trainer tell you can do like 10 more reps
Yeah.
when you really only have one in you.
Well,
And you end
maybe
up doing like 5.
Maybe the trainer didn't know if you could really do 10, but he felt like, well, if you think you only had 2 more and I tell you you have 10 and you hit 6, you still did a lot more than you were going to do.
That's what it is. Yeah. Someone you look up to, and you assume they're smarter than you about the thing.
Yeah.
If they tell you it's possible, then it is. Really interesting concept. I do want to talk about, so after high school, at what age did you marry your wife?
I was 19. So I had just gotten out of boot camp. I went to what we call combat training and then went to an A school. And I was in A school, like learning my trade within the Marine Corps. And we had decided before I went in that we were going to get married because we had to get married or it wasn't going to work, right? And so we got married. She was 17. We actually had to go to Tennessee to get married because that was the only place that would marry a 17-year-old. Mississippi wouldn't, believe it or not, but Tennessee would. So we went to Tennessee, Shelbyville, Tennessee, got married at the courthouse for $100. And
You were 17, you were 18?
yeah, and
Gotcha.
she's so we got together. Like we started dating when she was 15. So next year, this January, she'll turn 35, and it'll be our 20 years together. And we're actually finally having a wedding ceremony. But it's funny because now we could go spend $100,000 on a wedding. See, this was one of those frugality points. Is like so many people. Like we had $100 wedding marriage license. I had $150 wedding band that I'm still wearing from when I was 19 years old, and and then she had, I think she had like a $500 band that I bought her. And that's 2 kids later, business half sold, traveled the world, 8 years in the Marine Corps, lasted all that. And I know so many people that have went out and borrowed money to do a $40,000 or $50,000 wedding. They got a divorce. So I think it's just sometimes delaying that gratification. And now we can go and have this, big blowout party where people actually want to celebrate us, our success and our life together and the accolades. And we have so many friends that we've built along the way through business and the military. And it's just like, I feel like going to be such a much more rewarding experience now than it would have been to do it back then.
That's a great piece of advice. Have your actual wedding after you become successful, like
Yeah.
have like the expensive version of the wedding.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. I don't know how well that would fare with women, because a lot of,
I'll tell you this, with the right woman, it would fare well.
yeah. It's interesting too because it like kind of creates something to look forward to for her. Like the whole, I mean,
And
it's a weird incentive.
It
but
doesn't
yeah,
necessarily have to be 20 years.
yeah,
Like, we kept putting it off because we were just not where we wanted to be. But I mean, even 5 years. And I wouldn't say like position it like, hey, if we make it to this point, we can have a wedding, but be more of like, you know, like as just a rational conversation of like where I want our life to be. I want us to have, I want us to have children, and I want us to have, the golden doodles and the fenced in backyard and the, money put away and a life and a legacy that we can be proud of. And I think we need to be well on our way to that and financially sound before we make an investment into a celebration like this. Whereas, and maybe it's hard for some people to see that, but like having a $50,000 wedding and of course we were 19 and 17, so nobody wants to celebrate that because society's deemed that no one should get married when they're 19 and 17. But I think the problem is because like a long time ago, everyone was getting married at those ages. And I don't want to go back far enough where people were like, where he's talking about when they'd marry 14-year-olds away. I'm talking about voluntarily, like our grandparents and great grandparents' generation, where they were getting married young and those marriages were lasting a lifetime. I think that now the people that are getting married young, it's a different caliber of person typically. So when it doesn't work, they point to that they were too young. When it's that society has made the higher quality people wait intentionally, if they thought it was more acceptable and those same higher quality human beings were getting married young, there would be a higher success rate in young marriages lasting.
You think you should marry your high school sweetheart?
I think if you find the right high school sweetheart, you should. I definitely don't think society should convince you to not get married young. I think it's a personal decision with each person, And for me, like I wouldn't have it any other way. It made the most sense. And I also believe that you miss out on all the growth together. If I wouldn't have gotten married when I was 19 years old, I don't know that I would have ever gotten married. I mean, why would I have gotten, like at this point, sold 51% of my business? I'd be in a completely different place. I don't think I'd want to start having children in my late 30s. And I see this happening a lot. And I think this is why in a lot of countries birth rates are declining because people aren't getting married early. And so they start thinking, and some people will say it's because they're not able to get pregnant. I don't think that's it as much as they don't want to. Like, who wants to start a 20-year span of child rearing, so to speak, when they're in their late 30s? That's going to last until I'm 60. It just becomes this daunting task. And I think a lot of people are looking at it, well, I have fun in my 20s, and then I'll have kids when I'm in my 30s. But then they get there and they think, whoa, what the hell was I thinking? I don't want to spend because they start to think differently. Now this entire timetable has shifted. They don't feel as old as they thought they'd feel when they're in their 30s, and they still want to enjoy their life. So, that's a tough thing because obviously having kids is an extremely rewarding experience. I feel like you have to do it pretty young. Like I think doing it after you're 30 is pretty difficult for people.
What are the other benefits of getting married at a young age, or what qualities should someone look for? Like, is this advice you would give to your children? Like, get married when you're 20, get married when you're 18, 19?
I would say between 20 and 25. I would be completely okay with it. I don't want I'd be a little weird if my daughter was 17 getting married. Like, I
Yeah.
feel like, okay, you need to wait a few more years, but I would not discourage them from getting married in their early 20s. I think one of the main benefits is, like, no matter when you get married, you're going to have struggles like adapting to, you know, taking your lives and completely merging them together. But the longer you're single and the more habits you create as you get older, the more difficult that becomes, because people are like encroaching on like this set in stone way of life you've created as an individual. Whereas up until that point, when you're living at home, you're kind of already living with people, you're living with a family, right? And I think that there's just this period of time where you get to build a life together where you get to overcome all these obstacles together, and you have all these stories, like all the history I have with my wife now. I'm 36, and we've been together for over 19 years at this point. Like, all the stories that I'm going to have. Another big benefit, and is something I really want now. When I first started selling insurance, I came across a couple of couples that got married pretty young. This is more common in their age group, that were married for 70 years. And so now I have it in my mind. This is kind of almost like a one of those legacy check marks, is like, I want to have like the 70th wedding anniversary that we have like great grandkids at and stuff. I think that would be really cool.
Hmm. Really interesting. I want to clarify here. Were you kind of saying that, like, at a younger age, like say your early 20s, your brain is still a little bit more moldable. So if you find your wife, then you guys kind of grow and develop opinions together and kind of have that symbiosis, as opposed to like two people meeting when they're 30 who have these really set ways of thinking that probably aren't going to have as much give and take. Like, were you kind of saying that a little bit?
I think that's absolutely what it is. I think that part of it is definitely the physiology of, like, my brain is still developing, and so I can start to kind of, concrete or cement in some of these thought processes as they've evolved together. And I think a lot of it is just shared experiences that become so difficult to unwind that it feels like you're, pulling a part of your body away to actually separate yourself from that person. Um, and so, that's like, because it's not like we haven't had our own problems and had these like knockdown, drag out type of fights, metaphorically. But when we're in those moments, like, it always comes back to, like, I could not see myself without her at this point. And I think, some people might think of like the concepts like soulmate as those issues, but I think it's more that we become each other's soulmates through shared experiences and the desire to continue to work together towards, creating that life. So
I mean, that's really interesting. Like, could you see yourself, say you and your wife were together and you were finding a new woman who was your exact age? Like, what are the odds that she has like the exact same values as you that are correlative?
I feel like it'd be very
Yeah.
low. And I think that what we're probably now trained, like, society's concept would be like, well, you get together and you love each other, and then you might have separate values, and you just respect each other's values. It becomes very difficult when you're together all the time. Like, you want to respect each other's values, but I think it's almost like it's more realistic that they evolve together in the same way. Because, like, my wife and I certainly have different levels of conviction about certain concepts. Like, when you get into like religion and politics, like, we're pretty aligned. I'm gonna feel stronger. Like, it's like we have aligned concepts, but some of them I have a stronger feeling about than she does. Where, like, oh, we agree on that, but I don't. She might not care that much, and I care a lot, or vice versa. But we're still aligned on it, right? So, like, when it comes to, religion, very we have a very shared, value that we're believers in. I'm evolved into, like, I'm a creationist. I'm not an atheist. I'm a believer. I believe in creation. I believe in God. I choose, to worship in Christianity, but I also am, like, not a big believer in, like, one religion is right and all the rest are wrong. I think they're probably all different interpretations of the same message from God. Like, that's kind of where I believe, and we've actually evolved to where she believes that too, and that's through years of conversation about it. That didn't just happen. Like, she didn't come to that same conclusion without us. Like, and I may not have not come to that conclusion without that discord, that conversation between me and her. And that's the same thing with like politics and everything.
Hmm.
Like I grew up in a very Republican household. Fox News dad, like Shane Gillis talks about. She grew up in a very Union Democrat household, and we kind of met in the center where we have philosophies, on things, but we're pretty aligned. And I don't think that could have happened if we didn't get together so early. Because when we got together, we didn't really care about that stuff that much. But over time, you have children and you have miscarriages and you move 15 times and you have fights and all these things happen that make you, and then world events and, COVID and Trump this and, Biden that, and all these things happen and all these conversations happen and you evolve together. And I think that so many people are missing out on that. And now if people go and said, I'll take that advice, I'm gonna go get married young. I mean, there's cons to that. Like the con is in any marriage, like you're going to have to work very hard you're going to make a lot of stupid mistakes. But the number one, piece of advice that I could give somebody is do everything in your power to not do things or say things that you can't take back, that like chisel away at the core of that relationship. Like when you say something terrible, or because you'll get to these points and you'll be like, you feel like this is the end, so I'm going to like lunge this, insult that's unforgivable. If you do that in that point, like you're probably going to reel back down, but that comment's still going to be out there, or that action's still going to be out there. So that's the hard part. Because when you're young, you're also like your brain's still forming. So you are definitely, more emotionally responsive. You're probably more susceptible to do something stupid. And, you have to try to fight that as much as possible. But the thing is, it's not like we were perfect. I said things, done things that I shouldn't have. She has, but we still grew together. And like, I can't imagine that there's anybody that I know that has a stronger bond than us that was married after, like later in life.
How long have you been married now?
17 years.
17 years.
Yeah.
So you're married for 17 years. What's the secret to keeping it alive?
It's just, there's so many phases to it, but travel, new experiences, going out together alone. Like there was a period where we, when the kids were really young, where you're not going on date nights. And I think this advice is given pretty freely already, but it just holds true. Some of the best advice is like freely given. And then people say, yeah, I've heard that, but I don't do it. So don't ignore the advice of like continue to date one another. Like you have to go out and do things just the two of you, because you'll get into like, especially with little kids and stuff, like you'll get into these stressful situations. You'll have money stress. You'll have all these different things. So even if it's a freaking picnic, like just going to the park and go for a walk. For me and my wife now, every day we walk 10,000 steps together. So like just going out in the cold or the hot or whatever in the morning and walking helps a ton. Sometimes we'll argue on those walks. Most of the time we talk about other people. And actually, one of the guys I've always looked up to that you've interviewed, Grant Cardone, one time I heard him, this is kind of the buried Grant Cardone advice. He says, you got to get out and go to parties and date nights and stuff with your wife, because if not, you're going to run out of people to talk about. And so it's important to like go out and have experiences, so that when we're on our walks, we went to this party or we went to this charity event or we did this work function, and now we have something to talk about. Like, oh, did you see what so-and-so was doing? And that seems so like dumb, but when you are married, that is your gossip buddy. Like that's like the one place I feel like, I'm not a big gossip guy. That's the one place that's like, okay, we're going to chat about that. Mostly meaningless, harmless stuff, but you got to have something to talk about.
This is great, honest advice. Like I've seen in relationships as well. I mean, I don't even think it's like a feminine thing to be, or maybe not feminine, like a woman-specific thing to be attracted to gossip. Like I think men do it too. Like I think every business owner male is saying it to his wife.
We tend to hurl that at women, like women are gossipy. And I mean, I think that there's probably like they earn that feedback honestly, but I think sometimes men I think gossip a lot, but they maybe just gossip and then there's not as many emotional wires connected to the gossip. So that's probably the biggest difference. It's not that men don't gossip. especially to their wives. I know business owners are talking to their wives. If they're not, they probably have their marriage is probably suffering.
I think men like to tell their wife the thing that happened and get her like mirror reflection of it. Like they want to see her emotion arise of like the logic kind of
Yeah.
is a way of putting it.
I do it.
Yeah.
I tell my wife I tell her everything. Like anybody that works for me for a long time knows, like, don't tell Justin anything you don't want his wife to know. Not that she's like saying anything, but like, it's just who I talk to. And I think that's important. Like if you're not talking to your wife, like, she's your consult and buddy, like on stuff, then I feel like that would be a rough relationship. It's got to be your best friend. Like it can't work in my eyes long term. I mean, there's a difference between staying married for life and it actually working as a relationship. And I think she has to be your buddy.
Really interesting. You said something about buried advice from Grant Cardone. Like, I don't know if you can think of anything else on the spot, but is there any? I know you're someone that's really into kind of researching these guys who do education products and have actually benefited from them. Like, what's some of the most important things you've learned?
Well, I would say, like our business is a niche version of what Grant and like Brandon Dawson do. And that's by design, because when I've gone to their events or read books or anything, like everything and it's not just them, like we follow like Patrick Bet-David and a lot of these guys, but like we're not just listening to what they're saying, we're watching the way that they're doing it. And so when we created our marketing company to marketing to agents and we created events. So we have a large event that's like our growth con, but it's like basically divided by 10 in size because it's niche. And then we have behind the agency, which is like our workshop that's kind of like a 10X boot camp. But all that's like we would go to these workshops and I'm listening to what they're saying and I'm watching the way they're doing it. Kind of like when they say, do as I say, not as I do. I said the opposite is true. Like do as they do and as they say, but like what they're doing is part of that information. And I think people get lost on that. So if you go to a conference and you just watch the speakers the whole time and listen to the speakers and you're like writing down notes and then you go back to your hotel room, you don't talk to anybody and you don't do anything. I think you're getting like 10% of the value of the event, because the stage, like the notes I'm taking are, how did they design the stage? Did they release the speaker lineup ahead of time? Like the entertainment acts that came in between. When were the intermissions? How did they handle meals? What were the ticket levels? Like I'm doing that. I'm researching.
I was like
all
greeted
that.
when I walked in the door. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. What apps are they using to check people in? Like I'm thinking about all that stuff. And I was thinking about that before we threw events, because I was thinking like maybe we'll throw events. So I'm going to go ahead and think about that kind of stuff. But then another part of it is the absolute networking. I remember one time I was at an event and I was going to speak at it later that day. But earlier that day I was sitting front row and my brother was next to me and I whispered, and then there's a guy to my right and he said, he turned to us and he shushed us. And then he's just taking notes all day long. And then when I got up and spoke later on, he came up and he's like, I'm so sorry. He's like, I didn't know you were a speaker. And I was like, I just told him, I was like, a lot of the value you get out of these events are the people sitting next to you, not just the speakers. Like
you're like, this shit's for free online. Sorry to cuss.
Yeah. I just thought that was so funny that he like shushed us. And then when he found out I was on stage, he changed his demeanor. And I'm like, okay. But that's just the way it is. Like there's some people that just don't know how to get all the info. Plus, when you look at these people that are available, like I've built, so I would go to very industry specific events with a targeted idea. But when it came to the big influencers, I would watch their free content. I would read their books or listen to their audiobooks. So the money they were getting from me was like 10, 15, $20 on books, and then YouTube views. And that was it. And we were making several $1 million a year before I ever went to GrowthCon. And then, went to 10X 360 and did all that. But I didn't go to do all that stuff. And I'm not saying this to like discourage people from doing that early on, but I think it's important to like do the free content, do the books, then make some progress, and then say, okay, what's the next level? How can I amplify the success? Don't go and be like, hey, I'm making $0. Let me buy their most expensive workshop. Well, you're probably not ready for that. Like, go through the value ladder in order that it makes sense, you know? And that's if you decide to buy that. There are plenty of people that make a lot of money without ever giving, you know, people like them, or even in my niche, people like me, any money. Like, you can do it on your own. But also don't knock any of it, because there's definitely people that go through those. Like, I've gone through those value ladders, and I think it helped me, you know, tremendously. So, but I think it's important that if you're looking to go through the GC, the PBD groups, the Tony Robbins, whoever it is, like, you're looking to do that. If you're in my niche and you're looking to come to our stuff, I've got a lot of YouTube videos. Watch those first before you spend any money going anything. Like, take the free stuff that's at your disposal, the cheap stuff that's at your disposal, and then make use of it. Because I actually have a video that's on Instagram the other day, that the biggest difference between the $100,000 a year mastermind and the $97 a month university is just like the personalized aspect of it, or the the networking. But as far as the information, it's pretty much the same.
The other big difference is someone like yourself would never buy a $5 course, you know, but you might buy something that's $100,000 because that seems like it's worth your time relative to the amount of money that you make.
Right.
So if everyone watching this just realizes that these guys have to have products for everyone, you know, products that everyone would buy, maybe that's why they have some of these upper tier things. But
well,
I agree
another
with you,
way
yeah.
to say that is, you could probably buy for $97 a month with someone the same information that I paid $160,000 last year for. Like, now, I might have got it face to face from Brandon Dawson, but it's technically not. The information's there, you know. I mean, you could buy Brandon Dawson's book. Was it 9-Figure Mindset? I think, and he'll tell you, like, if you listen to that audiobook, and then you go to BMLP, which is Cardone Ventures like leadership program, that is like $160,000 a year to be a member of. It's, the information is very similar, very similar. And he's telling a lot of the same stories. Like, you're getting a lot of the same stuff. Now, the people that are in that room at $160,000 a year are probably taking it way more serious, because they put a lot of money into it, right? And they're at a different level, and maybe they have the ability to utilize the information better. The information's the same.
Yeah, I mean, I've been through similar stuff to you, very expensive, like one-on-one type stuff with these guys. And I've like benefited from it in other ways. Like, it's a big reason I have the podcast, actually, and was able to think about how to get great guests. But so many times that person referenced like their $10 course for their, you know, like they were like, oh, actually, like, have you been through that yet? And I was like, no, I didn't know you had that. Like, oh, it's all this stuff is actually like in there. And he said it to me multiple times. And I was like, gosh, like, maybe I should have just done that to start.
It's funny, like with Ryan Pineda, when I was talking to him, he was talking about how, you know, they have the value ladder of like Wealthy University and just like anybody else, but on the real estate side, and he said that there's so many guys that come and try to skip straight to the top. Like, and so that's why they have that product, like you're saying, because some of them just want the FaceTime, they want more access, they want podcast viewership, and there'll be like people that have seen him for years that have never bought anything from him, never bought a book, never talked to him. Boom, want to come in and be like, here's 50 grand. And so it's like, why would you not have the ability to cultivate that, you know, profit wise, because he's got the access, and technically they're getting what they want. They want the FaceTime, they want the access, they want the relationship. That's what they're paying for. So, and that's what's happening with you. Like, the more you put out, the more people will value like how much your time is worth, and the more they'll be like, dude, to be on the podcast, or to be or just to have like coaching calls just become increasingly more valuable.
Yeah, I think that's some really good advice in there. I think a takeaway should just be like for the guys that spend that 100K instantly, like buy the cheap thing and just check it out for 5 minutes and then buy the expensive thing. But like I myself have done it the other way around.
Me too.
I do want to talk.
I never bought Cardone University, by the way. And then it's funny because once I bought TBT, which was like $40,000, and I went to an event for that. That was like the first big thing I did with Cardone's group, and they kept referencing Cardone University. And it like, have you been through Cardone University? I'm like, same thing you said. I'm like, I was like, no, I haven't been through that. I was like, I'm looking for a different level of advice, and they're like, what's in there? And I'm like, well, shit. Had I known.
Yeah. I do want to back up a bit to the kind of Marine story. So before you married your wife, you'd already enlisted in the military. What was kind of the reason you became a Marine?
Man, my granddad was a Marine, and he was a real hard ass and sharp, and I always respected like him. And like all of my grandparents and a lot of my dad were all veterans, and they were veterans of different branches. But the Marine Corps always stood out as like the sharpest one. And so because I was in that small town environment and didn't know what else I was going to do, the Marine Corps felt like an adventurous way to really step my discipline up, my like kind of be proud of myself physically. And so I was searching for like this purpose and like this ascension of feeling, proud of what I was able to accomplish. And the Marine Corps, or especially in the small town, the rural areas, like they sell that really well, and to some degree they deliver on it, because like when you graduate from Paris Island and you get your equilibrium anchor ceremony where you're like pinned to Marine officially after 3 months, you go through the crucible, all that kind of stuff. Like there's a rite of passage effect that does give you a sense of pride. Then they send you to combat school and they beat you back down and they try to build you back up. But definitely the most, like the boot camp aspect of it was, very good. And then the
Do
camaraderie.
recruiters get commission for the amount of?
No, but they have quotas and they're trying to get promoted. So they definitely don't get paid for it. I think that would be a huge conflict of interest in selling yourself into servitude to the military.
I mean, it would make sense as like persistent as they are.
Yeah. No, it's so they're heavily tied to a quota that helps them get a promotion. So once you become a non-commissioned officer, like around a sergeant in the Marine Corps, you would go to you would try to do a B billet to get promoted to a staff NCO, which is like E5 to E6 promotion. It helps tremendously to go on recruiting duty or become a drill instructor, or go to like certain things like Marine Security Guard detail. There's like these billets you could do that help you get promoted, and recruiting is just one of those. But when you go recruiting, you have to deliver, so you have to meet your quotas. Then your fitness report is really good, and then you get promoted to E6. Once you get promoted to E6, you could actually stay in for 20 years and retire. If you never make it to E6, you get kicked out of not kicked out, but they call it higher tenure, where once you're 10 years in as an E5, they won't let you continue, so you can't retire. So I would say it's not commission, but it's
they're trying to retire.
They're heavily incentivized to deliver, on their goals.
What was boot camp like?
Boot camp is it's an extreme mental game. Like you go in and it's just like beat you down to where you feel like you're nothing. There's a period of time where you don't think that you're ever going to leave for some reason. Like that's what it was for me. I remember being like a couple weeks in, and I kept having this like thought that for some reason something was going to happen and I was never going to leave. And part of that is them telling you you'd find these Marines that would get injured and they'd stay in boot camp for like 10 months injured. And so you just kept thinking, I'm going to get injured. I'm going to be here for 10 months, which felt like forever at, 18, 19 years old. So it was, I had this Staff Sergeant Gauss was a kill hat drill instructor. Kill hat's like the most aggressive drill instructor. He's supposed to be the scariest guy. Staff Sergeant Gauss, who's a good friend of mine now, was a University of Alabama lineman before, like defensive lineman before turning into a bodybuilder and a Marine. So he's this gigantic, roided out looking guy. He comes out the first day, we call it forming day 1. They come out and they introduce you to the drill instructors. This is after you've gotten there, gotten into your uniforms, done your initial strength test. He comes out and he's standing there looking kind of like some kind of cartoonish, kind of looked like a Dragon Ball Z character when they're like in Super Saiyan mode. That's what they look like to me. He's like beet red, profusely sweating, huge. And when they unleash these drill instructors from attention, like where they basically tell them to take charge of the platoon and go on, they just start chaos ensuing where they just destroy everything. They're turning over bunk beds and acting crazy. And dude takes a polyurethane, like military grade canteen that's thick, really thick, not like hard plastic, and throws it on the ground and it shatters. And I'm just like, there's no way I could shatter that thing. Like it just would take so much pressure. And I remember like guys were just start crying and stuff. I was just kind of bamboozled. Like I was like, oh shit, why did I do this? Like this is gonna suck. I got to do this for 3 months with these guys. But it's in phases. So the first phase is just, I think they're just trying to weed out the people that just can't hack the level of mental intensity that happens in those first few days. Then it goes into what they call phase 1, which is heavily physical. Like they're trying to get you to adapt to your to how much you can actually run and stuff. And every day they'd start out and you'd run 3 miles, and then the next day you'd run 3.5, and the next day you'd run 4, the next day you'd run 5, then it'd be 7. And I remember every day they would never tell you how far you're going to run, so you have no idea. You just start running and you just wouldn't know. And it's not like I was a cross country athlete before that. I had prepared to be able to run 3 miles. So when we first get there, you're running an initial strength test, and you're like, okay, I passed that, good. And then the second day they run and you run 3.5 miles, and I was like, okay, that's the first I ever ran. The next day it's like 4.5, 5. So every day you'd run further and further, and I kept thinking, like, can I do this? But that was actually really rewarding because you get to the point where you run 7 or 8 miles, and you're like, I didn't even know I could do that. Like I didn't know I could run for that long of a period of time, which seems silly now because I've ran 12 miles. But at the time when you're 18 years old and you've never done that and you do it, it's rewarding because you realize you're capable of more than you thought you
Well,
were.
interesting too, because you're not running for the goal, you're running to run
Yeah.
at that point because you don't know when it ends.
You don't know when it ends.
So it's like the
anytime.
only thing to think about is the run,
Yeah.
which is kind of how business is. It's more about the love of the work rather than the love of the result.
True.
But you said you're a drill sergeant. I think you had a story about him.
Yeah. So I've got several, but probably my favorite one with Staff Sergeant Gauss. So right before I went in the Marine Corps, I had a car wreck and I had shattered all the metatarsals in my left foot, and I had to rebuild it before I could go in. So I had a lot of fused together bones, and they make you do this thing called a duck walk, where you'd squat down and you'd have to take a scuzz brush and you'd sweep with just imagine like something the size of a sponge in the sink, but you're having to sweep the floor with it. Just a common thing they'd make you do. That was a pain in the ass.
Metatarsals, you said, are those just your toes?
Like all the bones in your foot.
Okay.
So they shattered in the middle, and then they had to have screws put through them, and they put them back together. And so when they grew back together, they're a little more tightly fused than my regular foot. It was hard to put them all back together as nimble as a foot normally is. So I'm down in boot camp using this scuzz brush, they call it, where I'm sweeping and I'm supposed to be duck walking. Well, I'm favoring one side because the other side hurts pretty bad. And they don't know that because you had to, when I went in on a medical waiver, I told them it didn't hurt because you want to go in the Marine Corps, so you'd say it didn't hurt. So I'm scuzzing, and he sees me favoring and duck walking slower. So he comes and grabs me by right under my armpits, pulls me up, slams me into our metal rack, and then takes my scuzz brush and starts hitting me in the chest with it as hard as he can. Probably could have done it harder. And then the last hit, he hits me in the nose, and my nose starts bleeding everywhere. And then I get back down, and he has me scuzzing, and then there's blood pouring everywhere. So he tells me then to go to the bathroom and clean myself up. So the next day, they had this thing called the sand pit, where you'd go to the sand pit, and they would do this thing called ITing, where I don't even know what that stands for, right? Intense training. They would make you kind of like doing HIT, like high intensity tactical training, but it's at their command. So like push ups, mountain climbers, and you'd be doing it in the sand pit and all this sand. And I'm out there, and I guess because the artery in the nose was still kind of shaky, it busted loose and blood starts like pouring out in the sand pit. And so I'm like doing push ups and mountain climbers and in blood. They let it go on for a little while, and then they would make me clean up. But that kind of happened throughout boot camp after that. But it's funny now, like, because I know the guy as a civilian. He's actually got into the mortgage business afterwards. Him and his wife are pretty successful. She was a Marine too. And he's a good friend of mine. I wrote this book, Purpose After Service. And he wrote me on Facebook the other day, and he said if I'm not in that book, then it's a lie or something like that. So
it's really interesting.
But yeah, it's a you have these encounters, but like as you go through the Marine Corps and you understand what they're trying to do, you're not as worried about like
you don't take it personal.
Yeah, it's not a personal thing. Like if you think about it, if they're preparing you to go to combat, like should they pull their punches, or should they, like, obviously they shouldn't kill you because they're training you, but they should create a hostile environment because that's what, unfortunately the government might be asking you to go into in the future. So I think it's useful, but there's a lot of stories like that. Boot camp is really good. If you want stories, go to boot camp, especially Marine Corps.
You had another interesting story about boot camp, something about licking.
Yeah. Okay. So that was this drill instructor we had named Sergeant Arnold. And so in boot camp, you're in a squad bay and you have these open showers. Like you walk into think about a big square room and there's just shower heads all around it. There's no like privacy at all. And half the platoon would typically shower like at one time and then the other half would do. So it's just like an assembly line of hygiene. But there was one time where Sergeant Arnold, we didn't have anything going on, and like the worst time in boot camp was when they didn't have anything for you to do because they would just screw with you because they just had to pass time and you couldn't rest. Like that wasn't just relax, so they had to find things to do. So Sergeant Arnold we were in trouble for something. I can't remember what it was. There was always something they were coming up with you did wrong so they could continue to have a reason to punish you. And we had foot lockers, which were, think about like a one of those treasure chests someone would have like in their closet or something, like a chest. It was about that size. He had us all pick it up. So there's like 65 of us. And he has us all pick these chests up and walk into those showers. And as we're walking in, this one recruit is walking through the door to the shower, and the foot locker pinches between either him and another foot locker or the door or something, and it cuts his hand like wide open. He puts the foot locker down, and he's because his hand's cut open, and he stands up and he says, "This recruit's hand is cut, sir." This is how you had to refer to yourself. This recruit, you can't say I. And he goes up to him, the drill instructor, Sergeant Arnold, and grabs his hand, which has this open wound that's bleeding, and he just grabs it and starts licking his hand, licking the blood, and then just starts yelling and saying that, something like, this doesn't bother me or something. I can't remember exactly how he says it. And so the recruit just kind of like picks his foot locker back up and stands there and is holding it with this, open wound. But of course, in my head, I was thinking, boy, I hope he doesn't have like, HIV or tuberculosis or some shit.
Just licks his hand. That's really strange.
But they were just so in the drill. From what I understand, the school to become a drill instructor is pretty intense, and their whole goal is to try to turn these people into like insane people. Like they act crazy, and there's, every military branch boot camp has a certain level of drill instructor, but I feel like the Marine Corps ones are just like they it's a personal point of pride for them to be the craziest of all the drill instructors. Like they believe they are, and so they're constantly trying to one up, themselves and any other branch.
Really interesting incentive structure for them.
Yeah.
I guess, what do movies not show you about boot camp or joining the Marine?
They don't show you all the hurry up and wait time. There's like they don't show you the the pointlessness of some of the the downtime in the training. They don't show you how much information you have to learn. They make you memorize so much military knowledge. Like you're constantly memorizing like the Opal May Johnson's the first female Marine, and Chesty Puller had 5 medals of 5 Navy Crosses, and John Basilone had 2 medals of honor. And it's like, then they make you memorize triage information, but they do it with like ditty structure where they create like this thing they say and you repeat something back, and so you're constantly just memorizing information. So there's all these different qualifications. So you have to pass their swim qualification, you have to pass their rifle range score, you have to pass their information test, you have to pass a practical application test, you have to pass combat fitness, and then at the end you still have to go through the crucible. So like there's a significant amount of like qualification to get through. Unfortunately, in my opinion, the qualifications are too low. Like there's, I feel like 1/3 of people that are passing Marine Corps boot camp shouldn't be allowed to pass. And I would actually think that most Marines that I know like would agree. And it's because there's a quota of how many they have to get through. They just allow for, I just think the Marine Corps should be smaller and more more specific to the people that can make it. It's kind of like, oh, if you couldn't make it, you can go to another branch. That's the way I feel like it should be, because there were people that they basically had us drag through the crucible, like at the end, just so they could make it. And that put a sour taste in my mouth, because there were definitely people that were working harder than others to get through.
So how long were you a Marine for?
8 years.
And what was the title that you had?
I got out as a sergeant, and I was an aviation operations specialist. So I was doing a lot of operational attention to detail work. I was working with OPSOs and COs and XOs in these squadrons, like F-18 squadrons, C-130s. I did VIP transport squadrons. So I did a lot of different aircraft, but basically I was the guy that was working with the pilots to make sure that the flights were scheduled appropriately, all their training was done, the ordnance payloads on the aircraft were correct. We were putting out weekly flight schedules ahead of time, but editing 24 hours in advance. We were doing what's called daily and weekly situation reports, where you're taking what happened during that day and accounting for it and submitting that data like up the chain of command. I had a lot of my bosses were like Naval Academy graduates, so I would say my job wasn't all that common of a job, but it was kind of cool because I got to work for a lot of people that I think are highly sophisticated individuals, people that have gone on to be generals or high level, executives in corporations, airline pilots, stuff like that.
So as a Marine, what was your favorite flavor of crayon?
Oh, it was definitely burnt orange. No, and I preferred licking windows.
Licking windows? I haven't heard about that one.
Yeah, so that they in boot camp they would call us window lickers a lot. So
what were do you know some like other military stereotypes? Like, are there one specific to each branch?
So it's typically like what you just said about crayon eating. We would say that about the Army, and the Army would say that about us. The other stereotypes is we called the Air Force the chair force because they're they're like the nerdier one that they don't do as they don't work as hard. That's all stereotypical.
They just sit all day.
Yeah, they just sit all day in chairs. And I wouldn't definitely put that out there. Like there's going to be some people that would say because I was an aviation Marine that I swing with the wing, or I'm a pogue, which is a person other than a grunt. So a grunt is an 0311 or a rifleman. That's the guy that his sole job is to go into combat carrying a rifle. And so it becomes like taboo to be a pogue, a person other than a grunt, because you're not the tip of the sphere. But the funny part about that is there's a lot of people that aren't actually grunts that they consider grunts because they're in combat MOSs. And then there's people that are MPs or aviation that get reassigned to combat MOSs too during, conflict. Like I was an aviation guy, but when I was in Iraq, they made me part of the quick reaction force. So like you'd have to go and secure the base anytime there was like a vehicle-borne IED got on base, or like if there was indirect fire or something like that. So there's still combat elements to every MOS, especially when you're lower ranking. And there's this concept that every Marine is a rifleman. But they absolutely are right. You are a person other than a grunt. And I'm proudly was a person other than a grunt. I actually think having an operational MOS helped me develop a level of attention to detail on the, tech side, the computer side, because the level of scrutiny they would put, like when we're writing the flight schedule every day, and you'd go to the OPSO or the XO, and they'd be looking at they'd find the smallest error, the smallest changes over and over and over again. And so you'd get better and better at bringing them a closer to finished product every time. So you had to make less changes. So, or you'd start to know that they would have variable decisions and you didn't know what they were. So you'd create 3 renditions. And then when they changed it, you'd already have the rendition that they were going to change it to. Like, well, here, I've already made that change. Is this okay? And they'd be like, oh, great. And I think that was very useful for me. And it was also really good for relationships. I mean, before the Marine Corps, I'd never met anybody that graduated the Naval Academy. But when I was with the F-18 squadron, there was a ton of them.
From a CEO perspective, like, does the U.S. kind of run the military like a business?
I'd say each individual unit is ran like a business. I don't know that I could speak to the top down as much.
I guess I'm speaking specifically about each unit. Like, what were some of the lessons you learned about business through like the way they structured everything? And do you think they're like objectively good at like business compared to like most CEOs, like the way they structure everything?
I would say
and
so.
Expectations.
We had like the CEO of a unit's called a CO or a commanding officer, and I think that they're definitely good. I mean, there's a supply division of the unit. There's an operational division. There's a maintenance division. There's like all these. There's an intel division. So there's an administrative division. So like, or the S shops, what we call them. So it's what is it? Administration, intel, operations, supply, S1 through 4, and then there's maintenance. That was the way an aviation unit was ran. So a ground unit would probably be ran slightly different. But when you look at all those, every one of them has a unit head. They're communicating. There's reporting upline. So it's definitely ran like a business. It's just instead of a P&L, it's more of a mission readiness standard. Like, are we ready to perform, when called to perform? So everything's in a training mode until you're in combat. Once you're in combat, you're actually delivering on, the mission itself. Up until that point, it's all mission readiness.
What could business owners learn from the military?
I'll tell you what I learned. The biggest lesson for me, in my opinion, is it forced me to do the same thing for 8 years. Not the same exact role, but I couldn't leave. Up until that point, I'd had a few jobs. And after like 6 months, if I wanted to go to a music festival, I'd quit. If they wouldn't let me off for it, like, I'd quit, right? So 8 years in the Marine Corps, you couldn't quit, right? So it just kind of forced me into this standard of you have to continue showing up and doing what you do. And so it kind of forced me to adapt to a career, So as an 18-year-old, 19-year-old, like, you're not really going into a career typically, but it forced me into like a career mode. And you were actively making decisions on, am I going to stay in and retire from the Marine Corps? So you're like thinking about a career at 19 or 20 years old. Most jobs, most 19 and 20-year-olds have, they're not thinking about that at all. They're not thinking, I'm going to work here until the day I, retire. They're not thinking about that in the slightest. They're thinking another opportunity comes along, I'm taking that, or if I want to stop working and go somewhere, I'll do that. So, because like you're 23, but like you're not the typical 23-year-old, right? The typical 23-year-old is still not thinking that way. And by 23, I'd already chosen to re-enlist and move to Japan, right? So I think it forced me to grow up. So someone that's 18 or 19-year-old without a vision, it's great for them. As far as at a higher level, what it teaches you about business is the infrastructure, having the siloed aspect of this person's in charge of this person's in charge of this person's in charge of this, and then they're all reporting to someone. That was probably, that. And then, of course, attention to detail. But I wrote a whole book on the concepts that technically translate.
I want you to speak more to the one about doing the same thing for a long amount of time, because me, actually, I've found success in many ventures, which is probably why I've shifted to the other ones. I think I get this from my mom. She has a nasty habit of starting a business, getting it all figured out, becomes profitable, and she's like, I'll do the next one. I think this is a better idea. And like same thing happens to me, but I've heard from most entrepreneurs do one thing and do it for a very, very long time. And I guess, like, can you speak a little bit more to that? Like, how long have you been in like the healthcare industry? And like, what kept you in it? Was it just you had this buildup of doing the Marine Corps for so long, and you're like, okay, well, I'm the type of person now that I do things for at least 8 years?
I think that that's why I say that the 8-year, doing the same thing trained me to not, because I'm actually similar. My mother is a gypsy. So I say that because that's what my dad calls her. She would just up and leave and be like, oh, I'm going to go here for 3 years and do this. And then, oh, this is working pretty well. Okay, I'm going to go here. So similar to like what you're saying, probably in a different way, but similar where she would get bored. I can do that now. And in my business, I have to actively fight that because I'll have shiny object syndrome and decide I want to do something else. But in the beginning with the Marine Corps, I think because I had to be there, there was no like, oh, I'm going to quit. You can't, you're not allowed to. So instead of thinking like that, I would think, well, how can I do better? Because it was like, if I'm not going to quit and do something else, then I'm going to do as good as I can at this job, right? And that was what the Marine Corps did. So when I went into insurance, if it got, wasn't working for a little bit, or I didn't like it or whatever, it was my initial thought, I think, had been programmed in me to, how can I do it better? And
don't give yourself the option of finding something different.
Yeah.
Only give yourself the option of improving the other thing, because it's likely that that thing can be as good as something else.
Well, that's what now people are like, why Medicare? Why health insurance? And I try to tell, I start with, like, you can make $1 billion selling bubble gum. The product is not all that relevant to me. It's finding one that is viable, that people are buying, and sell it and continue to create a more and more efficient process and train more and more people to sell it. That's really what business turned into me, is like, it's not finding the perfect product. People buy all kinds of weird shit. So, I mean, there's so many, now at some point there are people that create a product from scratch. That's different. I think when you're just like looking at pure entrepreneurship, it's like the most pure thing is go out and find something people are buying and figure out how to become a better distributor of it than, the people that are competing with you.
Yeah, the thing about shiny object syndrome is people often are trying to find like the next business to start in 2025. Like, what is going to get me to 100K in like 1 month if I start it? But the issue with that, like the fallacy, is like the easier it is to build, or the things that are the easiest to build are often easier to break. So if you are constantly looking for like the highest leverage opportunity, one, it's an ego thing, like you assume, oh, well, I've had success in this. Any minute of my time that I spend doing this thing instead of this thing, I'm like losing out on X amount of dollars. But like, do you find that to be a fallacy?
Yeah. So in our space, for instance, this happens a lot with people. Like, Medicare is not a high commission upfront type of product. It's like, I need a bunch of customers that stay on the plan, that are happy for a long period of time. That's how you make a lot of money in it. Like, it's a quantity thing over, I need a bunch of people and I need them to stay on the plan. But the cost to acquire that customer is, so we use a lot of acronyms in like marketing, and you've probably heard them, but for the audience may not. But CPAs, cost per acquisition, that's a very common acronym. If my cost per acquisition is $300 for a Medicare client, but my lifetime value is $2,000, then I have a.
So basically, the cost it takes to get a customer, and then how much money you'll generate from their business over
a lifetime of the customer. Yeah. So it's like a 1,700 net yield over time. Now it takes time to get that, right? Like, it might take several years of keeping them on the books to get that. So I might have spent my entire first year's commission acquiring that customer. But year 2 is 100% profit. I don't have new acquisition costs. There could be some maintenance costs, but it's relatively small. But like if I look at an annuity customer, so in the financial services world, like one of the highest yielding commission products is an annuity. If someone has $1 million and they put it into an annuity, you could make between $30,000 and $100,000 right away off of that product, upfront commission. So if someone thought like, yeah, if I acquire that customer, look at all that money. But the cost to acquire a $1 million annuity customer is significantly different and much more difficult to predict, because the quantity of people looking for a $1 million annuity and the trust factor, like what is the barrier to get someone to give you $1 million versus the barrier to get someone to help with their Medicare product versus the barrier to get someone to buy a piece of bubble gum, for instance. Like you see what I'm saying? Like the cost to acquire, like for you to go in a store and try a new drink is a much lower, barrier to entry for a customer than for you to change your healthcare option, which is much lower than to go and hand them $1 million to invest for you, which, like there's all these thresholds. So like if you look at high yield, it's typically going to have a much longer period of time and maybe a lot more money spent to be able to get that action to happen. So it's not that that's a bad business model. It's just that the economics of it are different. So if I went to a higher yield process, I just have to know that it might take me a while just to reach the point of profitability again.
So someone with your experience, how do you think about starting new ventures? Like if you were going to do something else, would it be directly adjacent to your skill set? Would it be directly adjacent to your industry? Would it be kind of based on the employees that you've already acquired?
Your network is your network is so strong, like that you build in one sector, and there are other ways to approach the market. Like right now, like I would never start it out in software, but at this point, I would do software because I could take a software product, leverage all the relationships that I've built in the industry to find people that would buy that from me, and then just have like a niche software product that solves, an issue. Or
like a high ticket software, like a SaaS?
probably a like a software as a service, but like maybe it doesn't even have to be high ticket. It could be some kind of monthly recurring, like there's one that I'm working on right now. So and I don't want to spoil it, but
is it B2B or D2C?
It'd be B2B.
Okay.
So it'd be a B2B. So I'd go to like all the agencies that we've worked with and then have this software product. But it would, it's something for me, like with the private equity deal that I have, it wouldn't violate my non-compete because it's something completely separate. But I already get to leverage all those relationships that we spent all that time building. So I think that's an important, aspect. Obviously, when you have capital to infuse, that gives you another leverage point that you didn't have in the beginning. But like if I was just know exactly what I know now, but I didn't have my network and I didn't have money, what venture would I start? I mean, I'd probably start the same one just because I know so much specifically about that.
Would you start in sales?
I wouldn't personally start in sales anymore.
With $0 and zero connections?
Well, no, I would find someone to convince them to be a partner of mine that had money, and then I would start a sales team. I would definitely be in sales, but I wouldn't personally sell. Now,
I guess without your knowledge.
Without the knowledge, like if I'm advising my son what to do or my daughter, I'd say go into sales first.
So tell me about sales. How much what's the low end? What's the high end? How much can someone make selling health insurance?
I would say the lowest end on a successful agent is about $70,000 a year. The high end on an individual agent with like no employees, $500,000 to $700,000 a year.
And how many days a week is that person working?
The 70 to 150,000 range. These are like 40-hour work week type people, like 9-to-5ers that work in an operation that kind of handles a lot of the stuff for them, but they're just coming in and they're like the tip of the spear, but they're not doing all the marketing and stuff. We have those types of agents where we've taken all the guesswork out. They just come in and have all the conversations, and they're making 70 to 150,000 a year.
Oh, so they're just picking up the phone.
Mm-hmm. But on the business side, like if they go out and they're getting paid a higher commission, but more of the prospecting and marketing and how they get in front of people is on them. They're getting a much higher commission, but they get no base and they have to cover all their own marketing. Most of those people fail, like a very high percentage of them. They'll say 92% of insurance agents fail, but that includes the employee insurance agents. So I think it's probably 98, 99% of like the actual independent business starting insurance agents. But the ones that do succeed can make a lot. Like, I mean, as an agent.
And how are they marketing?
Most of the really successful ones are using Facebook, and then eventually they'll dive into direct mail. Some of them will use telemarketers. Some of them are buying inbound click-to-call leads through software companies like Convoso. But the ones that make the most build a sales team.
So they build a sales team under them. Gotcha.
Yeah, and then they stop selling. They just focus on replicating the process over and over and over again. Those are the ones that are making the 10, 15, 20 million. I mean, and some of them even more than that. Like, I mean, there are publicly traded companies that do what we do that have, billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar market cap, like eHealth and SelectQuote and GoHealth.
What do you think has been your unique edge in standing out in a maybe crowded, older industry?
Social media. When you
say social media, do you mean organic or paid?
Organic. Well, I mean, so first it started on the consumer side from me just selling when no agent knew who I was. It was paid. It was all Facebook ads for consumers. Then it transitioned, as we started documenting that online. I was listening to Gary Vaynerchuk talking about just documenting processes online, building a following type of stuff. And so we started that with a Facebook group, and that organic side, getting a group of agents and YouTube, getting a group of agents that was willing to listen to me as an authority figure. And then I would just take the success we were having on the consumer side and show them. That was where we were able to go and like duplicate I wouldn't say always younger, but like the under 50 market of agents.
What do you mean successful on the consumer side? What does that mean exactly?
So when I say making them successful making them successful selling insurance, not recruiting agents.
Okay, gotcha.
So there's a lot of insurance organizations that prioritize recruiting.
So half of your business is recruiting and half is the actual selling.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
So we started off
do you recruit for other agencies or only for yourself?
So we have, so the way it would work is we can have an individual agent that comes and recruits under us, and we make an override off of their production. So like this is going to be an oversimplification of it, but like let's say that they say they sell $100 a month policy, then the first year we get 100% commission and they get 80% of it. So like that's an oversimplification, but basically like we'd make a percentage over the top for recruiting them in and training them and helping them with marketing and that kind of stuff. But then we might have someone that comes in that's under us that maybe instead of us taking 20% margin at the top, we take 5%, but they build a whole sales team under them. And so we're still taking a little bit and we're helping them. And then sometimes we might even help them recruit to their sales team.
So the Facebook group, how many people were in that Facebook group?
Now it's 15,300. They're all Medicare and health insurance agents.
How much money would you say you've made off that Facebook group?
I would say 50 million.
You made $50 million off a Facebook group. Why? Like, what? 15,000 people? That's it? That's crazy.
Yeah. I think a lot of people think they have to have a very large audience. And I mean, I'm not saying that there's not value in a large audience too. It's different. But when you have an extremely niche audience that are all looking to you for the exact right reason, it gives you a lot of influence and a lot of power. So,
what goes on in that Facebook group?
It's like if you joined it, you wouldn't understand. It's a lot of acronyms, industry jargon. We were talking about the United Healthcare CEO thing. That's been talked about a lot in there right now. It's very industry specific, Medicare and health insurance industry specific. They'll talk exact client scenarios they're running into. They'll talk marketing things. They'll celebrate wins. They'll talk about how many people they were able to help this enrollment period. They'll bitch about stuff. They'll whine.
And how do you monetize it?
So we monetize it because
you market the Facebook group and pull agents out of there.
Yeah. So what we do is we promote events through there, and then we'll we'll get those people to come to free events, and like where you'll have like 50 to 100 people in those events, and then we'll come in and we'll train them for free at like pop-up events, and then at that event we'll sell them. We'll be recruiting them. We have a high level system that we'll lease to them called Go Guru. We invite them to buy tickets to bigger events like Medicare Con and workshops like behind the agency. So it's like we created kind of like that Cardone style value ladder, but very specific to the Medicare and health insurance world. But it's,
Would you say that Facebook group has been the most valuable like use of your time of any other marketing method?
Yes, the leverage on that has been.
How did you market the group? Is it just telling other people to referrals?
So in the beginning, it was just going out and personally adding people on Facebook and inviting them to it. And then it's organic now. I mean, that group gets 15 to 20 new members a day organically. And every one of them that comes in, I would say 15 to 20, we probably accept 10 to 12 of those, because some of them will be like marketers or people that aren't agents or something like that. So we're picking up maybe a net 10 a day in there right now. And they're all typically giving you their emails, phone numbers. We're adding them to lists. Then we put them on our email list. We're emailing them, inviting them to events, inviting them to paid events, inviting them to take contracts under us with certain carriers. So then we'll market a product. Like if we have a new life insurance policy with a carrier that has a new feature, we'll send emails out. We'll do YouTube videos. We'll send emails to get them to watch product information about that. We invite them to trainings, and then we do have a university, like most people do, like a $97 a month community where they'll go on. It's got an online learning platform, and then has 3 weekly calls where they basically are live streaming our internal sales training. So yeah, it's that Facebook group of individual things that we've made money off of. That's been the most valuable. I mean, the second most is just like is more complex, because it's the direct to consumer strategy of marketing, which involves multiple aspects. But as far as breaking down one thing, that's been the most valuable to us.
Don't you do some traditional methods of marketing like billboards?
We do.
How much a month do you spend on billboards?
So first I would say, don't go buy billboards. Billboards to me are like the last thing when you're using a localized strategy. Now, there are some very strategic uses of billboards that I've seen that get a lot of attention, especially in metro areas or for some big national brand or something.
But it's more about people taking a photo of the billboard and posting it somewhere.
Yeah, there's some very specific uses that I wouldn't get into, but like if I had a local office that was a financial advisory firm and we're like helping them market, billboard strategy mixed in with some social media, maybe some broadcast television or OTT television, can have an amazing like effect when you put it all together.
Billboards are bad.
Billboards are bad. Yeah, I would. I mean, so with billboards for us, we are spending. I think we have 2 local offices that we manage, that we own, and the rest of our offices are the partner offices that we consult for. So as far as like ad spend that we spend on our own offices, we're spending like $15,000 a month on billboards. But like TV, we've spent as much as $70,000-$80,000 a month on TV, and then on Facebook, we are spending actively right now about $80,000 to $90,000 a month, and that's all direct to consumer. Well, it's mostly direct to consumer. We do run some ads to insurance agents and people looking to be insurance agents, but that's a relatively small percentage of our budget because most of that has been organic.
Dude, this makes me feel young. I went to a hotel. I was doing a podcast in Miami, and I stayed at Doubletree Hotel in like Fort Lauderdale. It's kind of an older hotel because they had like satellite direct TV there. And I hadn't watched like ads on a TV show in so long. It like wouldn't work with Netflix or anything. I was like, let me watch Family Feud. I saw the ads, all these infomercials. I was like, wow, there's so many advertising dollars still going out. Like, is TV still competitive? Is it something that people my age aren't utilizing well?
It's the demographic. So so I would say that like older generation in like lower income, like lower middle class to kind of the federal poverty level, like in like lower income people that are older, like 50 plus, still watch a lot of local broadcast television. And you guys have them here. Because I'm an advertising nerd, every hotel I go to, I turn it to the local NBC or ABC affiliates because I want to see what the local commercials look like. That's broadcast TV. So when you have broadcast TV, they're just using the local affiliate airwave. When you have OTT television, that's called over the top. That's where you're advertising through streaming services. And then you have cable where you're advertising with an actual cable provider like Xfinity. And then so like cable is regional to some degree, but broadcast will only hit a designated marketing area. Cable, you could pick multiple marketing areas, and then with OTT, you could pick like multiple areas, or you could really narrow down to an area, and you can pick like demographics, like age ranges, because you can show it to like who's logged into that TV set or that. I don't want to say Netflix because that's not one, but like Hulu has a direct platform where you can advertise on Hulu, and you can pay directly to Hulu and say, I want people 55 to 74 and send them ads. We haven't had as much luck on OTT. It's actually broadcast because the kind of people that watch TV and will watch the commercials, we tend to find to be like the lower income. It's funny is it's a lot of the same people that we think are on TikTok. Like TikTok and broadcast television closely related. Facebook and streaming television platforms would be more closely related. So I just think you look at like who the person is and where would they spend their downtime.
Give me the easiest version of this because this feels like some like good strategy for like a kid my age or older that has a business that isn't advertising on TV. Like, so why do you look at the local commercials? Like, why was that the thing you did?
So local commercials are broadcast.
Mhm.
They're using like the public airwave there, and they'll have like a local station that's using kind of the antenna and then hijacking the broadcast wave. But whether you have DirecTV or like a Comcast or Xfinity or one of the cable providers, or even if you're just like you could have rabbit ears, literally, you could pull these broadcast stations into
So do you
TV.
advertise acting like a local company?
In the direct to consumer market. Yeah, like when you're advertising for
So you act like
Medicare
a
beneficiaries.
local health insurance
Yep.
company?
Yeah, like you're acting like a like so we have two different ones, but we have one called Gary Alford Insurance. We advertise in a market, DeSoto County, Mississippi. It's right outside of Memphis. We'll advertise on TV there as Gary Alford Insurance. We help people with this is a overgeneralization, but basically the message is we're helping people with health insurance and Medicare who are trying to shop through different companies. We work with all the companies, and we can help you.
But you
pick a
say
plan.
like it's based in that city in
Yeah.
the advertisement?
Yeah.
And how many cities do you run those ads in?
We consult with and personally run in probably 45 different locations right now.
And are all those ad creatives catered to those specific areas?
Yeah. We have one that we do where we try to be funny. So we have this one where we make it look like, so a big way to think about this is wherever someone would get their local weather report, like if you were somewhere where there was really bad weather, they would pull the local weather station up because that would be playing the most current local weather. And we'd run this one commercial where we pretend we're the weatherman for that station, but like we'll make it not that station so it's not so they don't get mad about it. But we'll go on and we're doing the weather report and we're looking for people that are turning 65. So we just say all the like I've recorded this commercial and could show it to you, but I'm the weatherman and all the variables of the weather report are 65. So we've changed all the graphics to say the high is 65, the low is 65. There's 65% chance of rain, 65 mile per hour wind. And then somebody comes in and runs me off the set because I'm not supposed to be there and I'm lying. And then I say, call Gary Alford Insurance if you're turning 65, as I'm running out. So it's kind of like, and
That's a genius ad, guys.
So-
Oh my gosh.
and we get we get so many calls on that. People are like laughing. They think it's hilarious. So that's, I'm a big believer on advertising is the two ways to get through to people are education and entertainment. There's a lot of people in our market that will use fear. It's not been my thing. I think fear gets you in trouble with the FTC because you can be causing like irrational fear and seeding that. And I don't really like those types of relationships. Those customers tend to be a pain in the ass, in my opinion. But the people that come to us because we had a funny commercial, those are the best customers. The people that come to us on the internet, we do a lot of education based marketing. So we'll run like ads for Medicare 101 webinars or Health Insurance 101. And people will sign up for a free webinar and they'll just watch like an evergreen webinar with us talking about the differences of different types of Medicare and health insurance plans.
What's good about that ad too, you mentioned, is like the congruency. So something that's extremely important in advertising is like whatever the thing you're selling, or whoever it's for, like that has to be in the messaging, like directly stated. And a lot of people don't do that. They try to like make it not look like an ad,
Yeah.
without offering like either the solution or the problem or who it's for in the like creative. So something you do there is like 65, 65, 65, and who's the avatar you're selling to? People that are 65, so
Yeah.
like it just gets their attention. And this product is specifically for people who are 65. It's really good ad.
Yeah. They'll do, yeah. So it's like some people are trying to be overly ambiguous. They'll be like, oh, we can help you when you're 70. We can help you. And that's true. But who do we want to help the most? People turning 65. And it's gotten to the point now where I get personally and our businesses get tagged on Facebook all the time for people that are turning 65, where they'll say, they'll be like making fun of them. Oh, you're over the hill. You better call that just the 65 guy, and they'll tag me. And that's because I'm the guy that does that weatherman report on all those commercials. But it's funny because they're joking, but it's top of mind for them. They're all thinking about it all the time. So when they're like, yeah, ha ha ha, I got to go on Medicare now. I'm getting old. But then, like, yeah, it's a joke. But then they call and they come in and they're like, well, I'm 65 now. Justin finally got me, the weatherman. I'm not seeing these people. They're coming in and my sales team is seeing them.
Do you have an offer that's like that people who are ages 60 through 64 can sign up for, like preemptively?
We don't, but we should. We do have webinars, but we haven't advertised it to them.
It'd just be interesting, like about to turn 65, or
Yeah.
someone that's about to turn 65.
So
and you could have something to sell them.
We have a friend, a partner that he does a similar one, and it's ru64.com, and he's trying to get them like, his whole tagline is don't wait till you're 65, ru64.com, and he does it on every commercial like that. And he kills with that. Like he goes into a lot of cities, and we never go into the same city because we're advertising like similarly. So we just like coordinate and go into separate towns.
What's been the biggest impact on your business as far as marketing?
Very small Facebook group full of insurance agents just brought us over $50 million.
And how many people are in that group?
15,300.
That's it?
Yep.
I want to know your opinion on this. You said smoking weed is for losers.
Oh, you found that? Yeah. So here's my thoughts on it. And I have this video on YouTube that we leave up because it gets organic views still. And it's, it was basically what happened was I'm building a sales team and my brother was on it. And my brother and his friend, who are doing very well in our industry now, were working on my sales team as employees. And they were just the kind of kids that would, really veg out and smoke so much weed. Like, and so I was really frustrated with them at the time for like how unserious they were taking their lives. And so I started ranting, and my videographer was just filming our training that morning, and he puts it up as weed is for losers. And it gets a lot of interaction in the comments. Actually, mostly people agree, probably because they're searching for that concept. But you do get some that are just like, they talk about medicinal and all this stuff. And so like, the problem with content is the most like loud opinions are the ones that tend to take off, right? Yeah. And so I don't not believe that, but if I'm going to like really water it down, it's like, people will say Joe Rogan smokes weed, and then there's like he's worth $250 million. Like you shouldn't smoke weed. And I kind of follow this same mantra that Grant's talked about, like this whole concept of like, well, I can do it functionally. I've just met so many people that can't. It just consumes their life. I don't believe it is a chemically addictive thing. People a lot of times in my comments on this video will say, well, what about alcohol? You're not saying alcohol. Well, it's a separate topic. I don't believe alcohol is good either. I don't think people should be drinking a bunch of alcohol either. the point is society kind of started making weed be so accepted that 15-year-olds look at it and they're like, weed's not bad. All those old people that said it were squares. And then they're 15 and they start smoking weed. And they're 16 and they're 17 and they're 18 and they're just like potheads. And they're just smoking weed, smoking weed, smoking weed. And I've been in these groups of kids and people that were my age that were doing it. And it consumed their life. And they would smoke at work. They'd come home and smoke.
But what's your issue with it?
My issue is it wouldn't they never get serious about their life because it numbs like any seriousness about like taking the bull by the horns and making shit happen. Like there's like, and then because my brother used to do this. He would smoke just shitloads of weed. And then he would tell me stuff like, well, not everybody wants to be successful like you, Justin, but it was a complete cop out. It's bullshit because now that dude is like the most success driven guy I know. It's weed numbed his desire to do anything. And I know that. I've smoked plenty of weed. It will numb your desire. It's like you can smoke some weed and it's like, fuck it. It doesn't matter.
It basically gets rid of your anxiety.
It gets rid of your anxiety, but sometimes a little bit of anxiety is good.
Anxiety is kind of a superpower.
Have you seen what's the movie, Inside Out 2?
I haven't seen the second one.
We were at Disney and we got there and we had the down day before and I took my kids to see Inside Out 2. And anxiety is the emotion in there. That's one of the new emotions that she's getting because she's turning into a teenager. And so anxiety, the whole point of the movie is anxiety kind of takes over and it's too much anxiety. But they make the point that a certain amount of anxiety is necessary. And like one of her emotions is pure joy. And she's like trying to get rid of anxiety. And it's like, no anxiety is bad. Too much anxiety is bad. But like just this numbing effect, it's the same thing with like taking, too many like antidepressants and getting like, you can get to the point where you just don't care. And not caring is not good either, right? So anyway, I'm not as much anti-weed as I am that people from 15 to 25, 50, like that's the age group that I think really we need to be telling is like, hey, it's not chemically addictive. It's not that bad for you. There are some great health benefits, but if you smoke too much of it, you will fuck your life up. And I think that should be the mantra because there are some that won't smoking it, but I believe the bad outweighs the good in that section of life.
Anxiety is kind of a superpower, and medicating for it kind of means that you're not solving it in a way. It's similar with depression, but I do think it gets to a point where like, if someone like you was extremely anxious, at least from my point of view, still it'd be like, I think that dude has enough success that he can smoke a little bit of weed to make himself less anxious.
Well, so I actually get migraines pretty habitually. And Mississippi has like medical marijuana legalization now. So I did go and get a card and I was trying it to like see if it helped with the headaches. And it did not help with that. It just turns out to be high with a headache. But
that sounds horrible.
It was not good. But weed doesn't have a great effect on me. It makes me feel really good, and then I'm kind of paranoid. And maybe that's just because I never done enough of it to like get past that. But I don't know. Like I've been around these people that when they're too young, when they started too young, that's my problem with it. Is 15 to like 20. How do you get through to those kids? Because it's like I'm the guy saying, eat your vegetables, like now it's like, I'm too old. I'm getting to the point where he's just 36. Like they don't realize like you'll wake up in no time. You're gonna be fucking 36. Like that's not that long. But when you're in that age group, like the world is just full of people telling you, enjoy your 20s, do all this. No, dummy. Like, that's actually the time to do some shit. Because when you're in your 30s, you should still be doing shit, but you need to be you should be like doubling down at that point. And then in your 40s, that's when you should be starting to slow down. I feel like when my kids move out of the house and it's just me and my wife, if we want to sit around and smoke a bunch of weed, who fucking cares? Like, I'm actually pretty extreme on drugs. I think there's probably just as much reason to have full legalization of all drugs. I'm not like a a drug war kind of guy. Like, I'm not the Reagan-esque, like, dare, like, let's make all drugs illegal. I think there's a lot of problems with that. But I also think that on the flip side, just going around and be like, weed is great, everyone should smoke weed. No, they shouldn't. Like, you may be, numbing yourself. Now, there's also a lot of people that are probably numbing themselves from realizing how shitty their lives are, and that might be good for society in some ways. Because if you're like, I mean, it's definitely not a great world for everyone. So if they get high enough, maybe they'll forget that. But I don't necessarily know if that's a great endorsement of weed. It just might be a benefactor. We might be the benefactors of people like being able to smoke and drink their way away from like doing something crazy, like shooting the United Healthcare CEO because life is hard.
The CEO of United Healthcare was assassinated. Who do you think is responsible?
This is a good question because there were some words on the bullets that indicated that it is a pissed off relative of a patient that was denied access to care or something like that. However,
It was denied, defend, depose.
yeah.
What does
Which
that
is-
mean?
So I think that what they're getting at is that there might be belief that the insurance carriers to some degree have a process of denying the claim, and then when first of all, the three words that are written are closely similar to a book written about property and casualty insurance, but the words are different. I think the other words were deny,
Delay, defend.
delay, defend, which that one makes more sense to me because it's deny, then delay the appeals process, and then defend it in court, I guess, or defend their stance. But this one, the way he wrote it, I don't know if he miswrote it or if he changed it intentionally. So I think we're doing a lot.
Why would it be depose?
I would assume that you would depose, like if it goes to court. Let's say that there's a claim where, because I've seen this happen, like where you had a carrier deny a claim that was like $110,000. Had this happen with one. This guy, and they denied it because it was a fully underwritten policy, meaning that he had to answer health questions to get it, and he lied on the health questions. So they denied the claim. He hired a lawyer. He sues them for it. The carrier can depose him then, and which is part of I'm going to depose you and ask you a whole bunch of questions and try to make this uncomfortable and drag the process out. So that may be what they're getting at. In that specific case, that's like one of the only ones I've had that was that big. The carrier did end up paying it. And actually, it was United Healthcare. They did end up paying the claim, though. I actually think they had a justifiable way out of that one specifically, but we don't see it as much. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I think actually having insurance agents helps this process because when a claim is denied or a prior authorization is denied, going to your agent that means you're going to have someone that's probably more experienced in the appeals process. So it's actually a great, advertisement for having an insurance agent versus just signing up online and having to deal with the companies directly. Because when you're dealing with a company like United Healthcare or Humana or, Blue Cross Blue Shield, these are monstrous companies. There's huge organizations. And so, you're probably going to have some scenarios where if you're dealing directly with them, it's going to be very difficult to get through. Whereas the agent might have relationships at the insurance company or ways around that. So, but getting back to the United Healthcare CEO, I believe that this could all just be a distraction. It could be more of I think this could end up being some crazy conspiracy documentary shit where it could be relative to, something he knew, and they're just trying to throw people off the scent to be something not relevant to what it was and make it more about it's about the claims process. Now the fallout of all this is wild because
I get what you're saying.
Yeah, it just
there was an assassin by a 3-letter agency, and they wrote that on the bullet so they would think it's about insurance.
Yeah.
And it's the people are mad.
Yeah, and I'm like,
there's not too many people who go around assassinating billionaires.
Yeah.
In my experience with all this. But.
Well, and that's if you look at the guy, the pictures are putting out, he just doesn't fit he doesn't look like the guy who
would care about that.
Would care. Yeah, he would just I don't know. He doesn't look like that guy. Like like when I picture that person, it's a different person than the guy that they've showed in that mug, like the shot. Like he looks like Jared Leto in that one picture. I'm like, he looks like a, I don't know. Like it's just a very strange. This is like a weird thing, but but the thing that's killed me is when you see the fallout of all the people like almost celebrating his death on like TikTok videos and stuff, like where they're commenting like my sympathy is out of network and stuff because like him specifically, like let's put this in a box. Like the process of managed healthcare, like the way that the health insurance works with prior authorization, predates this guy's existence. Like he is by no means the architect of the flaws in the healthcare system. And the flaws in the healthcare system go beyond the insurance companies into pharmacy benefit managers, PBMs, pharmaceutical companies, the healthcare, the hospital systems are complicit. Networks like provider networks, specialty groups that are owned by private equity. There is a fraud, waste, and abuse around the entire system. The insurance company is kind of that front line of like, oh, you got a letter from us that something was denied. So everyone's like pissed off at them, but it's part of an entire system that's jacked up. So it is a little bit crazy that he has become the face of like taking the brunt of all the blame of a system that's been in the making for probably since he was born. Like, I mean, this has been like 50 years of
Is that the
compounding
number one
issues.
company?
They're the biggest, yeah. Yeah, they're the biggest by, but then they'll talk about things like they'll be like, oh, they had record profits. But if you look at like if you understand economies of scale, like just because somebody made a lot of money, that might just mean that it doesn't mean that that's all relative to denied claims. Now, I don't want to get off and be the guy that defends the insurance companies. They have problems and they could do better. But there is progress that has been made on that. There's been pushed this year to reduce the amount of prior authorizations in the Affordable Care Act and Medicare Advantage. So, like, this is already being fixed. And one of my concerns is that a murder will get associated with the fix that happened before the murder, but just takes time to be seen.
Hmm.
It's like there's already, if you look it up, there's already prior authorization.
Was that a big deal?
Yes. Yeah. The prior authorization
Yeah.
issues. Yeah. It's a big deal.
Was that like the biggest like fix to the system that's happened in like the past few years?
I would say it's the biggest. There's been a lot of regulation that's come through that is meaningless and hasn't helped anything because they didn't understand the problem. But the
And how long ago did that happen?
Literally, like, I swear it was like 2 weeks before. So for all I know, it could be associated with this. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, I think it is really interesting that that's going to be associated with that. And I think that guy probably knew something that was going to get someone in trouble. So who do you think killed the United Healthcare CEO?
I would think that I think that it is very unlikely that we ever have an answer to that, a true answer to that question.
What if you had to guess?
If I had to guess, I would say if I had to guess, let's see, it wouldn't be people at the like it wouldn't be, some people are floating that it's other people at the company, because there are some legal inquiries going into United Healthcare executives right now based on insider trading. Could have something to do with that, but I don't believe so. I think it would probably be more likely just an overall distraction point. But I don't really understand what the goal would be unless he was actually had some kind of information, relative to
But
something.
you don't think it was a lone shooter?
I do think it was a lone shooter. I do think it was. I think it was like
No. I mean like
I
a
don't think it
random
was
civilian.
No. I don't think. I think he was. I think he was paid by someone. That's what I would think. I don't think it's just a pissed off guy. Look, I've dealt with a lot of people that had prior authorization issues. Like our companies do that all the time. Typically, we're able to help them with it. There's this stat so prior authorization, like for anybody that's like watching, and prior authorization is when you go to get a procedure, they put in a request for prior authorization for the insurance company to approve it, and the insurance company denies it, says it's not medically necessary. no shit, 86% nationally of those that we appeal are approved. So most of these procedures will get approved. And some of the ones that are getting denied are legitimately not medically necessary. And sometimes doctors won't tell people that something's not medically necessary because it's awkward for them to tell them that when they're being like audacious or whatever. So there are multiple nuanced parts of this issue. Like, sometimes a prior authorization might not go through because someone, like, let's say somebody's getting a weight loss surgery and they're not losing enough weight. So the insurance company says before we can do this bariatric surgery, you need to lose X amount of weight consistently, or we don't think that you'll recover correctly from it. It's like a legitimate prior authorization issue. Like, you should have to lose a certain amount of weight. That's just one off the top of my head. But there'll be other times, like somebody might be denied for a liver transplant because they're have alcoholism history. Like first we have to identify that there are times where a prior authorization denial makes sense and it's like justified. Like, so anyway, and so like once you do that, then you can say, well, we can't eliminate 100% prior authorization, because then the medical community the fraud would go up. Because we also have to admit that doctors and healthcare administrators, because one thing when people look at providers, they're like, oh, the doctors are trying to do the best and the insurance companies are screwing them. There are these groups that are healthcare administrators. They're not doctors. First of all, doctors can commit fraud too. No one's unsusceptible to the temptation of making millions and millions of dollars. But there are also healthcare administration companies that are filing the claims. They're middlemen between the doctors. Most doctors aren't filing their own claims. They're doing doctor shit. So this other company's filing the claim, and they're taking a percentage. They're taking a percentage of the claims. So the fraud, waste, and abuse associated with their claims process could be, to the tune of billions and billions of dollars. I mean, it's actually, I think Kaiser Family Foundation estimates that the American taxpayer loses like $10 to $15 billion a year to egregious overcharging by providers. It's not like the doctors out there most of the time committing fraud. It's just the process is broken. So the insurance company is trying to keep from paying those claims. Now, do the insurance companies go too far and also use it as a means to increase their profit margin? I can't say that they do that, but I'm sure that they're just as susceptible to the fraud as anybody else, So yeah, it's a problem.
What do you think of free healthcare?
I think free healthcare, universal healthcare, Medicare for all, as an idea would reduce the quality of healthcare. Yeah, there is a direct correlation in the advancement of biomedical science, like pharmaceuticals and medical technology, and the cost of care in the United States. I don't think that we have a perfect system, but I also think that life expectancy would be lower, people would be dying, and certain symptoms would go untreated if we didn't have the infusion of the private market into our system. Now, the problem we have right now is that it's a crony capitalist system. It's a marriage between the government and private corporations, and so that's where it gets messed up. It's not really a capitalist healthcare. It's crony capitalism, which is lobbyists talking to the government talking to big insurance companies. And then there's kind of a monopolistic issue that we start to run into with the biggest companies. But, if there were free healthcare, like coming from me, there's going to be people that would think that I'm biased because we profit off of it as well. We're one of those epicenters. The thing is, if they actually did Medicare for all, it would probably still involve distribution like me. So we'd probably make as much or more money.
Is insurance a scam?
No, insurance is the transference of risk. It's taking a small, when you have risk, you have your probability factor, and then there's like the actual magnitude of what the risk is. So might have like moderate to low probability, but with a high financial risk. But if I can take a bunch of people and transfer that risk to a company that then plays the law of large numbers, that is actually a great solution to the problem. It becomes a scam when people expect insurance to cover things that aren't high risk situations. For instance, if you have someone that thinks their health insurance should pay 100% of their claims, well, now you're talking about insuring $20, insuring a $50 risk. And so you're giving all the power to the insurance company to charge more and more and more because they're paying for everything. And that is not the way it was designed. It was designed to have high deductibles and be paying for big risk, right? So I don't think it's a scam. I think it's turned into a point where the consumer's desire for it to do certain things give them the opportunity to become a little bit more scammy or less valuable.
Top 3 best insurance companies.
Top 3 best insurance companies. Oh, you get me in trouble. Actually the smaller ones that we work with, like Heartland National, Bankers Fidelity, and Manhattan Life, and Aetna, those have been great companies for us to work with. But we like, United Healthcare, Humana, Mutual of Omaha. We have great relationships with all of them. Of course, I have to say that.
So what is like the best piece of advice as far as like insurance for people? Like, is there anything you don't buy insurance on? Is there something that you make sure to have it? Is there like a certain way to do it? Like your unique way of doing it for you personally with as much as you know about the industry.
I don't insure any risk I don't think anyone should insure a risk that's under like $2,500 to $5,000 in potential cost to you. So like cell phone insurance, I don't think people should do that. I think most people that are moderately healthy should buy high deductible health insurance. I think they should buy high deductible homeowners insurance, but then they have to be disciplined enough to save a little bit of that premium, put it away, and then have that nest egg for if something comes up, they can pay their deductible. So my philosophy would be buy high deductible, health insurance, property and casualty, homeowners insurance, all that stuff.
So if I were to Google that, just be high deductible insurance?
High deductible, yes. High deductible health plans, high deductible property and casualty insurance. No matter what you're insuring, first of all, it has to have a risk greater than 2,500 to 5,000. For me, it's greater than 10,000. I'm not going to insure anything with a risk greater than 10,000. And technically, I could probably move that up to 50,000. It doesn't make any sense. Like based on whatever your liquidity is, you want to start to raise that risk threshold of what you're willing to risk. And you can consider the probability. Like if it's very unlikely to happen, I'm willing to risk a little bit more. But like I don't want to risk $2 million in healthcare claims, even if it's got low probability, because that's a big hit, right? It doesn't make any sense. If I can pay, for like my family, it might be $12,000 to $15,000 a year in healthcare premiums to avoid a $2 million potential like healthcare scenario on one of our family members. Even though it's a low probability, it's worth it for me to pay that. But if the risk is like, 50 grand, like if it's a car, it's a $50,000 car. At this point for me, if I've had that car paid off, maybe it makes sense because the probability is higher that, having a car accident than I get cancer. Like, you see what I'm saying? Like, you're always weighing, like, what's my probability and what's the actual risk to me and what's my liquidity? That's the scenario. But instead, people just blindly enter the insurance world and they just like buy the minimum insurance they can get on certain things and the max they can get on others. And that didn't I've seen people that have no income, no savings, terrible health insurance, but then they'll have like the max cell phone insurance plan. Doesn't make any sense.
I do want to ask you, what age did you become a millionaire?
Wow, that I've never been asked that before. If I deem that like having $1 million in the bank, like liquid, that's kind of the way I think about it. I was probably about 30, 31.
30. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Best piece of advice that I have ever received is make content. Honestly, like we were talking about with the Facebook group, going out there and putting things out without understanding what the immediate return on investment is, I think led to that $50 million in value coming from that Facebook group. Because I put content in there and communicated with people for 18 months before I felt like I made the first dollar off of it. And most people would think that's crazy, but thankfully, Gary Vaynerchuk was telling people to send T-shirts to people for 4 years before ever asking them to buy anything while working a job. And while I felt like that was crazy, I pretty much did that, not for 4 years, but for 18 months before we made any money off of that group. And I think it was paramount to growing that audience to not ask them for anything for a while before it got its own traction going. So I think that's got to be pretty far up there as far as advice goes. And then, stay in the course. Like, it's the same thing, stay in the course, not thinking about the immediate return, not chasing the biggest return on investment, just going out and doing the work day after day and compounding that individual effort. Maybe an overly broad answer, but it has worked.
Awesome. Well, Justin, this has been great, man. Where can people find you?
Instagram at the Justin Brock, or you can watch us on YouTube at youtube.com/Justin Brock.
Justin Brock, the Justin Brock for Instagram, Justin Brock for YouTube. Awesome. Well, everyone, this has been the Jack Neel Podcast. This is your guest, Justin Brock. Appreciate having you on, man.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah.
Appreciate you.